Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell. You'll get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And when I'm not asking Bruce, hey, how big was Batista's? Well, you know. One of the things I like to do is help people save money. And if you're watching this video right now and you're in a 30-year loan, man, you're overpaying your single biggest bill and you may not even realize it. I want you to do a little experiment for me. Take your calculator out, multiply your monthly house payment by 360 payments. That's how many payments there are in a 30-year loan. That big scary number, that's your total of payments. You're looking at that number? You know you can do better. Keep more of your own money right now and go to savewithconrad.com. Or maybe you've got credit card debt. Man, it's not a matter of if I can save you money with that. Your average interest rate on a credit card is more than 20%. And by the way, all the interest you pay on those credit cards, it's not tax deductible. Whereas the mortgage interest, well, that is tax deductible. So if you owe this debt, it's up to you how to pay it back. Doesn't it make sense to get the cheapest rate possible and the greatest tax deduction possible? Find out how much money you can save right now for free at savewithconrad.com. You don't need perfect credit. Even scores in the 500s can be approved, and it's no cost out of pocket. But maybe best of all, we're licensed in more than 40 states. We can help more families than ever before. But how much can we save you? Find out right now for free with a quick quote from savewithconrad.com. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Grillin' JR with the voice of wrestling, Mr. Jim Ross. Jim, how are you, man?
Conrad, thanks for asking. I'm wonderful. I'm having my second cup of coffee. It's got a little Bailey's in it, so I feel pretty good about that. And enduring the hot weather in Oklahoma. But the main thing, so in my mind right now, is the fact that as folks hear this, I should be in Chicago. I should at least be en route to Chicago, and I can't wait. I'm so excited about StarCast and All Out and seeing what kind of crowd we draw and all that good stuff. I can't wait. It's going to be a lot of fun here this weekend.
Yeah, StarCast is here. It's starting today. We're going to have Being the Elite live mailbag, and we're also going to have the press conference for All Out. And, of course, Cody Rhodes is going to sit down with Tony Schiavone. You're on stage tomorrow, going to do some meet and greets with your old pal Jerry Lawler. It's going to be the place to be. And, of course, Saturday, the world is going to be talking about CM Punk. He's going to be on stage with a live mic in his hand right before All Out. The world wants to know what he has to say, and you don't have to guess. You can see it live at StarCastOnFight.com. Or if you're still around Chicago, why not stop by? Check it out, StarCast.com. You can grab a bracelet right now. You not only get to see the Punk show, but 23 other shows as well. And I'm pretty fired up about today's topic. In honor of CM Punk coming back, we're going to talk about the one and only CM Punk today. Jim, let's just start right at the top here. When did you first hear about CM Punk? He feels like one of those guys that may have been on your radar as a name you had heard, because he had a lot of buzz outside of WWE before he ever got signed.
Yeah, CM Punk was a big top star there at Ring of Honor, most fans realize and remember. He was their champion at various times. So he got on my radar, I'd say around 2004, and then he came to WWE in 2005. I want to believe that my run as the EVP of Talent Relations was over by that time, but it was pretty simple. You know, you go to Ring of Honor and you got, not like any other promotion, you take their top guys if you can get them and bring them in and mold them to your own image, if that's possible. So he was on the radar because a lot of the talents liked him because of his work ethic and his in-ring stylings. Phil Brooks, a very unique guy, as you know, inside and outside the ring. We were talking about that, but a lot of the talents wanted to work with him, and I thought that was a pretty good recommendation. But then it was pretty much a no-brainer for Laurinaitis to bring Punk into WWE. He was really one of the best talents in the world at that time, so that was a good hire. And but around 2000, I'd say really got more familiar with him around 2005, Conrad. You know, when he was making that transition back out of ROH into WWE.
Yeah, I think a lot of fans really start paying attention to him in Ring of Honor because he has a really sort of a landmark feud with Raven. I think that was like 03, maybe 04. I first saw him do a promo in 2004 for Ring of Honor and thought, hey, I don't know what this is, but I'm in. It was one of those really, really well done promos that you wonder, how much of that is real and how much of that is story, because he cut a pretty scathing promo on Raven and talked about Raven's addiction problems and compared it to his own father's addiction problems and explained that he was straight edge. And if I'm honest with you, that's really the first time I learned about straight edge and what that meant. Jim, when did you learn about the straight edge movement and CM Punk and how he had sort of woven that into not only part of his wrestling character, but his real life?
Well, the same as you, I watched a lot of Ring of Honor, especially in those days, because they had not they don't have a good roster now, they do, but they had some, pardon me, some really significant talents on that roster at that time. Samoa Joe, Bryan Danielson, Daniel Bryan, and others that I will leave out for no particular reason, but I forgot who the hell they are. No, I'm kidding. They had a good roster. They had a lot of really strong talents that were wrestling centric, and that always appealed to me. And Punk fit right into that group. I'm like you. I heard his straight edge mantra the first time on a promo in Ring of Honor, and I like you. I was not as familiar with what straight edge really meant in total, and I also didn't know that it wasn't a gimmick. I said, well, this guy's got a unique idea here to draw attention to himself. It's a nice way to do a promo if you're a babyface or a heel. It kind of made some sense. But then I found out later on, right after he came to WWE, that this was no gimmick. There was no act. He believed in the straight edge lifestyle. He still does. And that was the way he lived his life. So it was a learning experience. And as we said before we started recording, he was such a unique guy that I'd never met a wrestler that I can recall of his prominence and skill set that was straight edge. All the boys would drink a beer every now and then or go meet the hotel bar, whatever the case may be, and that was social, but not him. That was not his deal. Even though he's one of the most social guys in the roster, especially with the ladies, he just was not going to be doing any drinking and not going to do any drugs. So I admired that. And for me, as a former talent relations guy, getting him in the locker room with no baggage of that regard was a bonus.
Well, you mentioned it, we get lots of questions about this. You said, he's one of the most social guys there, especially with the ladies. You got anything you want to elaborate on there?
Well, I mean, he dated several women wrestlers there at WWE, and it's not secrets. I think he dated Beth Phoenix, who's now married to Edge. I can't remember all the other. Raphael Morphy and I were talking about that the other day, just on a trip. I mean, this dude got around, man, and he was very social and very much the ladies' man. So, more power to him. Bula bula for CM Punk. But he was very social in that regard. But he was always social, and he was never high. He was never drunk. He never buzzed. So, but he did pretty good there. He had a nice social life, and then of course ends up marrying his bride. I always thought she was extremely attractive, talented, complex, a character that you just couldn't help but want to see more of. And so, his life it's been a really interesting story we're going to tell here today. But he's a unique dude, no doubt about it, and intriguing as hell to be around. And I think the fans are going to see that at StarCast. He's very opinionated, and he's honest. So, he may ruffle some feathers. I expect that he will at StarCast, but I think it's going to be one of the more intriguing presentations that you're going to be bringing all the fans in this entire weekend. He's that good. He's been dormant. He's been silent. And I can tell you that it's just not his style to be silent. And I think, Conrad, I was wondering, I was going to ask you a question. How hard was it to get him signed?
Yeah, it was a process. I don't think that he was necessarily looking to do anything, but over the course of a few months of emailing back and forth, it felt like, there was an opportunity, and then it would go away for whatever reason a few times. And I kind of thought it wasn't going to happen. And then very quickly a deal came together, and we're excited to have him. And the wrestling world is curious what he's got to say. You know, he's been silent for a long time, and I think everybody wants to hear more about what happened in the past. But what I think most people are interested in, and the question I'm sure he's going to get this weekend, no less than 500 times, is what's next? Because he, you know, sort of took a break from wrestling and did some MMA. And now this is a very public appearance for him, and the first one of its sort since he walked away from the WWE. So this is going to be different for sure.
Yeah, it's going to make a lot of headlines. Yeah, his interview will be quoted ad nauseum in our world, and it'll also be interpreted ad nauseum in our world. Well, here's what he really meant by all the amateur psychologists / wrestling fans out there that are expert in mental health and psychology. I say when I say bullshit, but anyhow, it'll be fun, and it will be quoted. It'll be there'll be nothing happen this weekend at StarCast that will top globally the news and the noise that CM Punk will make on Saturday. None. It's a great get for you. When you told me you signed him, I was ecstatic for you, because to me that kind of put the cherry on the sundae for StarCast 3. Just, man, this is a get, and so congratulations to you on that deal. And like you said earlier, the folks can still see it. If you're not even going to be in Chicago, you can see it on the Fight app. So I encourage everybody to check that out, all avenues of it. But there's nothing like being there. There's nothing like being there whatsoever, and I'm glad that I'm going to be there to hear it. I want to find me a spot in that and sit down and listen to that interview. I'm very curious what he's got to say. So I'm pumped about it.
All right, we need to take a time out right now to remind everyone about the risks of driving drunk. You could get in a crash. People could get hurt or killed. Let's take a moment to look at some surprising statistics. Almost 29 people in the United States die every day in alcohol-impaired vehicle crashes. That's one person every 50 minutes. Even though drunk driving fatalities have fallen by a third in the last 3 decades, drunk driving crashes still claim more than 10,000 lives each year. Many people are unaware that driving while high can be just as dangerous. In 2015, 42% of drivers killed in crashes tested positive for drugs. Not so harmless after all, is it? And get this, from 07 to 15, marijuana use amongst drivers killed in crashes doubled. The truth is, driving while high is deadly. So stop kidding yourself. If you're impaired from alcohol or drugs, don't get behind the wheel. If you feel different, you drive different. Drive high, get a DUI. Drive sober, or get pulled over. Let's talk about, his influence, and obviously CM Punk had a lot of great matches. And I think most hardcore CM Punk fans remember his trilogy of matches with Samoa Joe in 2004 for Ring of Honor. Ring of Honor had a bit of a scandal in 2004, and folks thought, hey, this might be the end of Ring of Honor. And once they started to right the ship, they needed something to sort of pull the nose up and change the conversation about what people were talking about with Ring of Honor. And what Gabe put together was not 1, not 2, but 3 matches with CM Punk and Samoa Joe. And these were really, really outstanding matches that were on everybody's radar, especially Dave Meltzer's, and he gave them high marks across the board. If you had to go back in time, obviously we know that Punk is going to wind up in the WWE or signing with WWE in 2005. It's probably the trilogy with Samoa Joe in 2004 that put him on WWE's radar. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely fair to say. It puts Samoa Joe on the radar too. So they helped each other because they had great chemistry. Their matches were fought and presented with logic and physicality. It was easier to suspend one's disbelief in the presentation because of those stylings that Punk and Joe exhibited. So it was an eye opener for everybody. But they had Samoa Joe and CM Punk had, just in my humble opinion, there was no better wrestling in 2004 on anybody's ring, better than what we saw as fans from Punk and Joe. So they did themselves both a great service, helped each other, quite frankly. And But those are monumental matches, and it's sad that I think the DVD that they did on those cats was one of the best sellers, not the best seller that Ring of Honor had at least to date at that time. So yeah, that Samoa Joe marriage was great booking, and the talents obviously enjoyed working with each other. They were allowed the freedom to create in their own personal image and the way they felt, not the way a agent or a producer or a writer felt. It was their ball game to manage. And I think giving talents of that level, that opportunity generally gives you the best chance to have a hell of a match and a keeper, so to speak.
It's sort of interesting too, his journey he takes before he winds up in the WWE, because, and I think a lot of fans have probably forgotten this, but he was signed to Impact. He was a part of TNA Wrestling and was down there pretty regularly and routinely. And, for whatever reason, they didn't do much with him. You know, he had the occasional spot on the big show, but he wound up being on their, sort of prelim show Explosion quite a bit. And it just wasn't, it maybe was a missed opportunity there. And at the time, Court Bauer was running, MLW. This is before he shut down and took the long hiatus, and before he relaunched and now is on TV. But the early days of MLW, he's working there for Court as well. So between Ring of Honor and MLW and TNA, he sort of made the loop. I mean, he was everywhere before he comes into WWE, and that's always, you know, the big time. And he grew up as a big Piper fan. That's one of his first memories. And I think there's an old photo of him floating around where he got to meet Stone Cold Steve Austin, probably in around 1997, maybe 1996. And, you can tell that, you know, he's just a huge wrestling fan, and he's really attracted to the strong promo guys. And that's going to be the hallmark of CM Punk, not just the in-ring stuff, but his promo style. Who would you compare him to on the microphone? Is there someone from wrestling yesteryear that you think, Punk kind of reminds me of him?
I always thought, because of unpredictable nature, and what you can't assume what he's going to say or what direction he's going to take, that he reminded me, pardon me, a little bit of Terry Funk back in the day when he was a great heel and able to inside a crowd. He was a great salesman, verbal salesman. Terry was, and he never knew exactly what story he was going to tell, what analogies he was going to use, but somehow or another he made it all relevant to his game inside the ring. So that would be one guy I could think of right now. But there's it's rarefied air in comparing Punk to anybody else doing promos, because quite honestly, there was a time there, in my opinion, that he was the best on interviews in the business at one point. You know, his pipe bomb stuff is very infamous and so forth, but he is a unique cat in all areas, including how he mixed his martial arts stylings in with his wrestling matches. But what brought him to the dance and kept him at the dance in a big money position was his verbal messages that he could communicate. And so I think he's really in the last several generations, he's in that conversation with the top promo guys of all time in that regard. So, and because the subject matter was so unique, and it was a natural extension of his own personality. Folks have heard me say that right here. The best stars are extensions of their own basic personality. Stone Cold Steve Austin is exactly like you see him, except he turns the volume down a little bit when the camera's not on. But his dialogue, his mantra, his feelings, his presentation are all very, very consistent to his natural shooting the breeze. Austin and I'll get in a conversation sometimes about football. We talk a lot of football, especially this time of the year. And it sounds like an impassioned wrestling interview. But we're not talking about wrestling, we're talking about football. So that's just, my point is, Austin is always just manifested his own real personality and let it roll. For better or for worse, here it is. And I think Punk had the same philosophy. He just had different stylings. He sang a different tune, but it was still the same road he traveled that Austin traveled, by being honest, open, and saying things that were based in fact that the audience could relate to. It's this really simple process that for some reason a lot of talents just never are able to master. Punk mastered it.
You know, you bring up Austin. I feel like I've got to bring this up. Several years ago, to promote the new WWE 2K video game, they did a promotion where Austin is sitting down having a conversation with, at the time, WWF or WWE champion CM Punk.
Yeah.
And
I conducted that interview, actually.
So chat me up, you know, everybody was a buzz. Hey, does this mean that, you know, Austin may be coming back? Is there a chance we might get to see this? Is something going to happen? What do you remember? Was anything like that ever discussed?
Well, casually, you know, get anything to get Austin back in the ring in that era was going to be experimented with or suggested or whatever, because he was the golden boy and he was the Mac Daddy, the lead dog, and all that other cliches. I remember doing that interview, and Paul Heyman produced it. I interviewed Punk and Austin, and we had no rehearsal. We had no script. We had bullet points as to what we needed to try to intertwine in our presentation. And those two guys, I mean, I was like the point guard. All I did was give them the ball. So I'm not going to take any credit or break my arm patting myself on the back for the interview. I was glad to be a part of it. But they had as good an inaugural chemistry as just about anybody I can recall. There's no doubt in my mind, if Austin and Punk had gotten the ring together, they would have produced masterpieces. They had the same basic philosophy of reality-based pro wrestling and to be natural extensions of their own personality. They're all on the same page with all that stuff. And both Steve and Punk were great wrestling fans as a kid. So they were lifers. So I would have salivated to see that match, and even more so to call it. It just wasn't in the cards because Steve's health, but man, oh man, that was some of the most fun television that I had been a part of in a long, long time. Thanks to 2K and Bryce Yang and all those guys putting that together. Heyman was, like I said, was there producing. It was a real cool moment for me to be a part of. But again, it just shows that people go back and look it up. Go back and find that Austin Punk interview. If you haven't seen it, folks, it was kind of obscure in a lot of ways. So it didn't get mainstream. It didn't make Raw, let's say. It didn't get mainstream coverage. But god dang, man, it was scary good. It was almost, you would think, because how it came off, Conrad, that we had gone over it, we'd rehearsed the day before, and then the next day we'd come back and get do it for real. No way, baby. It's just, here's some bullet points, here's your cameras, and we'll count you in and go and have at it. So it was beautiful. It was a beautiful day of production.
It's sort of fun to armchair quarterback and fantasy book the territory, so to speak. How do you think Punk would have fit in the Attitude Era of the WWF?
Peanut butter and jelly, baby. JR's barbecue sauce and those good old ribs, hand in glove. Every other analogy one could come up with, he'd have fit perfectly. He would have fit as good as anybody that we had on the roster in the Attitude Era because he was attitudinal for real. And the nice thing about him, one time I was talking, he's a very competitive guy. So there's no doubt, no reason to be surprised at how good his promos were, because he wanted to be the best he could be. And he was really devoted into being the best in his profession. So I think that the son of a gun is just, he would have been perfect in the Attitude Era. And there we could have got to see that Austin and Punk match. That would have made the Attitude Era even better. But he'd fit perfect with Conrad. He's almost too perfect a fit in the Attitude Era, because it's like it was created for him, because he was genuinely attitudinal, and that's what got him over, I think, his attitude.
$42,737. $42,737 is how much equity in your house you could lose access to come September 1st. The clock is ticking. If you thought you ever might want to access the equity in your house to maybe do a home remodel, maybe put in a pool, maybe put in a man cave, upgrade your kitchen countertops, maybe a tile shower, whatever you needed to do around the house, you were probably going to use your home equity, but you'll lose access to a boatload of that on September 1st. And I'm talking to you if you thought you ever might want to do some credit card consolidation. That's going to get a lot harder. Maybe you hope to access some home equity to help your kids buy a car, maybe cover some college tuition. The time to act is now. September 1st, the federal government is going to make a whole bunch of changes that make it a lot more complicated to access your equity, and in some cases could cost you access to $42,737. Now check it out right now before it's too late at lastchancetosave.com. Now, to be clear, you don't have to close your loan by September 1st, but you do need to at least start the process. Let us run the numbers, see if it makes sense right now at lastchancetosave.com. That's lastchancetosave.com. You don't need perfect credit. You don't need money out of your pocket. If we can't help you save money, we won't waste your time. But real estate in the United States over the last 2 years has gone absolutely bananas, which means your house is probably worth more than ever before right now, and interest rates are about as low as they've ever been, which means there's never been a better time or a cheaper time to borrow money. It's a perfect storm to make the most of your home equity, but hurry, the rules change September 1st. This could be your last chance at lastchancetosave.com. That's lastchancetosave.com. NMLS number 65084, equal housing lender. Well, he's obviously on you guys' radar, pretty early on. He does a tryout in 2003 that didn't really wind up going anywhere, but I think he may have even popped up on TV at one point in like a backstage skit where he's congratulating Brock Lesnar on winning the belt, not as an on-screen character that's been named, just sort of in the backdrop or background. And that's right after Brock had beat Kurt Angle for the world title. But he gets another tryout in 2005, and that's probably when you guys really decide, hey, we're gonna do something here. I think it's May of 2005. He got a win over the Amazing Red, and a few days later, he worked with Val Venus, and this time it made Sunday Night Heat, and I think that's on YouTube somewhere. And Val, of course, beat him. And then about a week later, he worked one more dark match with Matt Capitelli, and I'm sure we'll talk about him another time. And he would try one last one 3 days later with Scotty 2 Hotty. And at that point, you guys extend the offer. So May of 2005 is when the offer comes, but behind the scenes, he had been putting in a lot of work with Ring of Honor. He was their trainer, and he had been tag champ and world champ, and he had done it all with Ring of Honor. And as we mentioned, he had done some stuff with TNA, but probably the most notable thing that happened at TNA was a bit of a falling out with Teddy Hart. Sometime in 2004, I believe there was a situation outside of a Waffle House in Nashville, which is where they were doing TV every single week, or their pay-per-views at the time were a Wednesday night pay-per-view. That was the format for their business. And Teddy Hart is one of those lightning rods for controversy. I think a lot of people assumed that it would have eventually worked out where he would have been a part of WWE. And I know he tried a few times and he was there for a cup of coffee, but it never really panned out for Teddy. Any stories about Teddy Hart you can share with us? I don't know when we'll talk about him again.
Well, I was happy to hire him because he was such a little phenom, little meaning young, I should say. He was very, very skilled and talented. You're raised in a Hart family. You learn to work when you learn to work before you get your driver's license. You're a Hart family member, and he was, so Teddy was his own worst enemy. And some guys mature, Conrad, at different times of their life. We know that from working and being adults and having businesses and so forth. It's just one of those situations where everybody kind of sees the light or the light becomes more clear at different times of our life. And you and I both know wrestlers that are up there in age that still haven't matured. They're still living the life of a sophomore with too much money in their pocket. But Teddy wasn't ready for the road. It didn't seem like, here's the thing about Teddy Hart. he did not have his lack of success in WWE, in my opinion, had nothing to do with his skill set. He's a hell of a little hand. I know he's doing some work for Court Bauer now in MLW, and I got to believe he keeps everybody on their toes. But he's a really, really outstanding talent with a great skill set. I just think that in that era, at his age, he was just he was susceptible to making errors in judgment in that regard, and a lot of this is based on the maturity level. It is not a sin, by the way, folks. It's not a sin, but we talked about this one time with Scott Hall when the plane ride from hell, and we had to give Scott Hall his notice. And I believe that we helped contribute to his longevity by getting him off the road. But he'd had his run. Teddy had not had his run when we hired him, but we were loyal to the Hart family, and I believed in their work ethic and their DNA, and so we gave him a shot. Even though he was smaller, he's just so damn talented. But I think the issue is social maturity. And hey, I said the same thing on the rookie Brock Lesnar. He was a handful, but because he had never been on the road. There were things on the road that he'd never got to experience that he kind of liked. So Teddy was just a talented son of a bitch. I can tell you, he really was. And I hope he does great with the MLW and he can live this dream. But I think he had to make some. I saw him where did I see him not too long ago? Maybe at AEW somewhere, a taping or something. Something we did, and he was there, as best I recall.
He was at StarCast too in the back. I mean, he wasn't booked to appear or anything, but he was definitely in the green room. I saw him. So
yeah, we talked, and he's talking about, hey, I made some mistakes young, and we all did, man. The key thing is learning from those mistakes and moving forward in a positive manner. And it seems like he's doing that right now. I don't know. I saw a little clip of him the other day with him and Hannibal. I had a little verbal spat on video, and I didn't know if that was a work or if it was real. But anyway, he's a compelling character. But I like him. I hope he does well. You want all those kids that can stub their toe, and that you got to terminate. I didn't like giving him his release. You don't like giving anybody the release, especially somebody that cares. The one thing about Teddy. Sometimes I think Teddy cared too much, and sometimes that clouded his judgment, just to utilize common sense and conduct himself as a valued member, a teammate within the locker room structure. And but I like his game. I like his game, still do. But that was the issue there with him at that time.
Talk to me a little bit about the situation, the fight. Fights in wrestling unfortunately happen. Talents don't get along. There's some words exchanged, then there may be a dust up. It seems like it happens a lot less these days than maybe it used to. But when you hear that, hey, Batista had a run in with Booker T, or in this case, Teddy Hart had a situation with CM Punk at a Nashville Waffle House. Does that make its way to your desk? Do you hear about that, even though these guys aren't working for you? I mean, you're certainly familiar with both names.
Yeah, of course. They wanted to scatter, smother, cover, and chunk each other. Don't think I haven't been to a Waffle House about 1 million times in my lifetime. The word gets back because it makes the old proverbial dirt sheets, and everybody can't wait to get their hands on a freshly minted, mailed, and received dirt sheet. So I was aware of it. But hey, I'll tell you what, I'm sure Teddy's a tough kid, and he has no fear. I get that. And he may be the baddest man in the land. I don't know that either. He might be. But I can tell you this, man. Sight unseen, I got to pick a winner. I'm picking Punk. I had an interesting conversation one time about shoots and real fights and things like that. And he was very, very matter of fact in telling me that, I like to fight. And he said, JR, I will fight anybody. I'm afraid of no one. That's how I live my life. I can't be afraid of anyone. And the lifestyle that I've had growing up as a kid, his dad battled the alcoholism issues and so forth. His mother had some issues as well, according to what we read online, bipolar type issues. He's he's a tough son of a gun, and he doesn't have any fear, and he likes to engage in physicality. Hence, he went to the MMA, and he's smart enough guy to know that trying to get in the MMA business on a high level like UFC when you're in your late 30s is probably not the most judicious decision one could make. Your chances of you succeeding are slim and none. And as Nikolai Volkov might say, old Slim just left town. So he had an uphill struggle in that regard. So I know that he's a combative son of a gun. He would have been a handful. It would have been a hell of a fight, but I think Punk would have, and I don't want to piss off the Hart family because I love them, but Punk is I don't know, he seems like he always had a sense of urgency when it comes to those situations. And you watch his matches in the ring, he didn't hold things back in the ring. He was not a stylistic guy, even though I'm sure he didn't stiff people and hurt people. I've heard of that. But what he did looked awesome, and it looked like you can't see through it, as they say. So I like his chances in that situation. But to know how he is, he's naturally combative. He's naturally competitive. And boy, those are great traits to have if you want to be a star in the pro wrestling world.
Let's mention here that when you guys bring him in and agree to sign him to a developmental contract, of course, as you said, the dirt sheets get a hold of it, so everybody knows that he's signed, but he's allowed to finish up his commitments to Ring of Honor, and they schedule him for a world title shot in June. So, not too terribly long after he has that tryout match, and he beats Austin Aries and wins the world title, and the fans are cheering. And, of course, afterwards he grabs the mic and does in his words, his first pipe bomb. He even references that the microphone in his hand, or in anyone else's hand, is just a microphone, just a tube of plastic, but in his hand, it's a pipe bomb. And he announces that not only is he the Ring of Honor world champion, but he's taking this Ring of Honor world title to WWE with him. And, eventually he shows up in a suit, which is very un-CM Punk life, and signs his new WWE contract on top of the world title. That's old school good stuff, is it not?
Absolutely. So logical, real, felt real, was real in that respect. Smart stuff by him. No doubt. I've always wondered, I'm not so sure looking back on the situation, if it had been my call, sometimes corporately you got to send a guy with his skill set, to like say OVW. And we always got great results out of OVW back in the day with Cornette and Danny Davis and Rip Rogers. All those guys are great. And now Al Snows owns OVW, and they're training some real good kids. They're going to produce some stars. There's no doubt about it. So there's a lot of good schools, folks. So the OVW school in Louisville is one you don't want to sleep on. It's a damn good one. But I'm not so sure he needed that stop off at OVW, other than maybe to get maybe like an orientation on how we do interviews, or how the PR is done, or your schedule, what's expected of you. Like I said, what's the word I'm looking for when you go to college?
Orientation.
What is it?
Orientation.
Yeah, I said that. So anyway, that was kind of an orientation for him. But as far as going there to better improve his game was a waste of time. His game was great. Don't screw with what he's doing, because it's working. And he makes it work because that's how he feels about his presentation. Don't screw with that. But to go to OVW for any other reason, just to kind of get his feet on the ground, get people to know him a little bit, because he wasn't the easiest guy to get to know. He had a very, at times his personality was very withdrawn. Sometimes he kept things to himself, maybe more often than not. But to go to OVW to learn to work or to improve his game was, I thought, a waste of time. And it sometimes is used as a very awkward way to humble somebody. And until that was then. Now, if you're in NXT, you're on one of their main brands, and arguably, some people think it's their best show. But at that time, Conrad, it was not that way. It was a legitimate little developmental territories. And, my question would always be, did he really need to go to Louisville for anything particular other than a quasi orientation?
All right, we need to take a time out right now to tell everybody about our friends at Daniels. Now, we often say you can't judge a book by its cover, but we also know that that's exactly what most of us do. Appearance can be everything, especially in a professional situation, which is why I want to talk to you about that bag over your shoulder. Are you still carrying an old college backpack to work or around town? If so, man, it's time to grow up. It's time to look the part. Get yourself a Daniels briefcase. Daniels is a New York City-based men's leather briefcase brand that's making boys look like men one bag at a time. But the best part is you can actually afford this badass bag before you land the big job. By cutting out the middlemen and selling directly to you, Daniels can offer you a high-quality luxury leather briefcase at an incredibly reasonable price of only $195. Compare that to a luxury brand name, they've got starting prices closer to $500. And my experience with this briefcase has been unbelievable. It's the perfect size for my laptop. It's not too big. It's not too small. It's just right. Just like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. I'm telling you, the leather's high quality. It looks exactly like what you want to carry into an office. It makes a good impression if you're in a date situation as well. It's going to carry everything you need. And this week, our listeners can get $25 off their Daniels briefcase at danielsnyc.com. That's danielsnyc.com, and use our promo code GRILLING at checkout. That's $25 off one of their leather briefcases. Oh, and they offer free shipping. Again, that's danielsnyc.com, and our promo code is GRILLING, and you'll get $25 off a handcrafted, high-quality leather briefcase with free shipping. So ditch that old backpack and start looking like a pro. danielsnyc.com. I love their leather briefcases, and I'm confident that you will too. So check it out. danielsnyc.com. So let's talk about it, because he's been pretty vocal about the fact that he felt like it was, I don't know, maybe a slap in the face. He was upset that he's relegated to developmental. And when he's there, he discovers that, hey, Heyman's here and he has a lot of respect for him. So this won't be a bad thing to get to learn from him, but he thinks he's ready. And apparently Heyman agreed. Mm-hmm. And according to Bruce has sometimes said that when someone, and I've heard from other folks in a more, maybe honest manner, that if someone campaigns for a guy at events all the time, that sometimes Vince just sours on the idea, not because it's not a good idea, not because the talent being suggested isn't worthy or worthwhile, but because he's just annoyed that the person continues to bring him up. So as a result, he just isn't interested. Do you think that there's such a thing as, well, here's an example. I've heard a few years ago, Arn Anderson would bring up a talent over and over and over. And he would say in any of the meetings, hey, what about so-and-so? And he did it often enough that someone told me that talent was, quote, Arned, meaning Arn had pushed for him enough that now, just to spite Arn, Vince would never do anything with him. Do you think that maybe some of the early, stutter steps that Punk had is because Heyman was campaigning behind the scenes too much and it just annoyed Vince, and Vince said, fuck it?
It very well could have been, Conrad. Very well could have been true. That's possible. I've seen the same thing, and I've done it myself. I'm as guilty as Paul Heyman or anybody else touting a prospect or somebody we want to sign. I was lucky in that role because I didn't have to get Vince's approval to sign talent. I signed guys after a while after I had that job because my track record got pretty good with our team. But yeah, I can see that very readily happening, where there's a pushback or backlash on overselling. But I'm with Punk. The value of Punk going to OVW was the fact that we had Heyman there. And Heyman was good at looking at talent, refining their nuances, and creating their a marketable image that would sell tickets and pay-per-views and so forth and be a viable member of the team. Because if Paul likes somebody, for Paul's own ego, he doesn't want him to fail. And neither would I. So I'm the same way in that regard. And I think Paul probably maybe learned some of that from me back in the old days in WCW. Because we traveled together, worked together, and communicated daily. And Paul was on the scrap heap there because the booking committee hated his ass. I've always said that The reason they didn't like it because some of them were insecure that they realized Heyman was much smarter than they were, and they didn't want him around. So I made him my broadcast partner, took him out of the booking committee's hands. But yeah, man, I think Punk made the good news about this deal in OVW going to Louisville was the fact that Heyman was there, and Heyman could actually help refine, put a little bit of shine here, there, and yon on the coarse edges of Punk, if that's a good term. So that he came out a winner on that deal, because here's the bottom line: once Punk got to the main roster, he was obviously really, really ready, and maybe even more ready than he would have been if he went directly from Ring of Honor to the WWE roster. But my point is, him being in OVW was a good thing because Heyman was there, and it was a nice stop off because it kept him in the protocol. They're sending, that was the Vince's mandate. Send all these guys to the developmental, and let's see what we got with them. And it's not a bad philosophy, but again, you don't send them there to help them learn to work, because they can't take a flat back bump or so forth and so on. You send them there to learn the WWE way of conducting business that is largely a non-bell-to-bell function. So I think all in all, it was a good deal for him, but did he need to be there long? No. And I don't think he was there long.
Something you said a minute ago, I want to circle back to, but you said a lot of times talent would get sent to OVW as a way to humble them. Do you, can you elaborate on that? Because I feel like there's a lot of people who could interpret that different ways.
Oh, probably can, and maybe they should. My view was that you get a talent that's full of himself or herself, and they have been in a territory or a small indie-like company, and they think they have all the answers and they're perfect to go. They don't need to practice. They don't need to get to mold themselves into the locker room. They're ready now, and a lot of guys, women, men, whatever, are not ready. So. And if you come in with full of yourself, like some guys do, I should have been signed here years ago. Instead of saying, hey, man, I'm glad I got this opportunity. I'm going to make the most of it. I'm going to work my ass off. You're going to see it, and you're going to see the results. That's one thing. But to say, I was ready to go from the get-go. I didn't need to go get trained. You think a guy like, none of these kids on NXT, because they are ironically going head-to-head against AEW beginning in, us in October. They're going to start in September on USA. Some guys believe that that's what makes the NXT different now. You think Adam Cole and all those great workers, Gargano and all those kids, needed to go to NXT to become good workers? No, of course not. They're good. They were good the minute you laid eyes on them. But again, you got the orientation aspect is there. They're always going to do that. But I think Punk. If anybody was going to revolt and feel really, really insulted, it would be him. And I think with good reason, Conrad. But he did it, and I think the saving grace there, as we mentioned, was that Heyman was there to see after him, and that I think that meant a lot to Punk, and I think it meant a lot to him even more later, because Heyman helped get him ready for the main roster.
Let's talk about somebody else who's going to eventually wind up in developmental, and it's probably the match that really had everybody talking. One of Punk's first friends in wrestling is somebody he meets in wrestling school, a natural athlete who has gone on to maybe carve out a different path in professional wrestling, Mr. Colt Cabana. And these days, Colt's legacy is all about wrestling podcasts and pro wrestling tees, and what an impression he's made and forever changed the wrestling business. But when he was just a young upstart, he's doing every indie he can with his pal CM Punk, and they're getting a lot of buzz and a lot of attention. And eventually you guys would bring him in for developmental as well and try him as Scotty Goldman, I think. What can you tell us about the relationship of CM Punk and Colt Cabana back then? We know things maybe a little different these days.
Yeah, they apparently are not seeing eye to eye now. Legal issues and kind of wedged itself between the friendship of the two guys. Well, back in the day, as Tony Gurria would say, they were buddies. I mean, they were best friends, it seemed like. They're almost joined at the hip. You saw one, sometimes you were sure to see the other. So they had a real good wrestler-to-wrestler relationship. They both, lived in Chicago. They did the Indies together. They spent a lot of time working with each other. I think they helped each other's in-ring game immensely because I've always said you can't get better in the ring consistently working with people that are not as good as you. So you have to have a comparable skill set in the ring with you to get better at your game. And I think both those guys pushed each other well in that regard. And I remember bringing in Colt Cabana. I thought, for some reason, I never have understood this, that Colt Cabana was a very, very good worker. He still is. But it seemed like the thought was, well, somebody thought he was not going to be a great wrestler, not a main event guy on the WWE level, which I totally disagree with. And so they wanted to make him a broadcaster. And quite frankly, I've heard some of his broadcasting work at Ring of Honor. He's very good.
Yeah.
He's very good. But that was the deal. It was almost like we're going to throw our hands up. No, he's not going to be a great wrestler. That story reminds me of Brian Pillman, who we were going to make, after he got his ankle fused, make him a broadcaster in the shades of Jesse Ventura or somebody. And he hated it because his wrestling career, in his mind's eye, was not over. In the reality of the matter, it was over because he can't be as athletic or as he was when he had his feet were good, his ankles were good, and all that stuff. But I think that was the thing about Scotty. He wanted to wrestle. He had unfinished business to do in the ring and wanted to get it done while he was still able to do it, and not start a brand new career as a broadcaster. But I can tell you, whoever had the idea of him being a broadcaster in WWE was right on the money because he's really good at verbal skills. And why would you think not? He was one of the first guys to podcast, and he's a good talker, smart kid. He's very interesting to talk to. But I think both those guys are very, very complex in a lot of ways. Some ways, somebody might say that both Scotty and Punk were both, were complex guys. I'm not so sure how complex they were. They may have been more just the other side of that. They may have been very simplistic. Treat me right, be honest, be fair, respect me, and you'll get 10 times that in return. And so they had a great relationship. And it's unfortunate now that they don't have that relationship any longer. And I can only hope that for anybody's friendships that last long and you separate for a while, that they can reconcile and move on.
Let's talk about one of the things that he gets going with, he being CM Punk, pronouns pal. He makes his debut on OVW TV, and very quickly, has a little bit of trouble. I think he suffers a ruptured eardrum and a broken nose on his official TV debut. And he's really out of sorts here. And he would admit years later that he didn't really know what WWE wanted, but he knew that they had a reputation of being sort of the land of the giants. And you got to remember, this is 05. This is not now. So in 05, the top guys are guys who look like Batista and Triple H and John Cena. They're not necessarily guys who look like Daniel Bryan or, for that matter, Samoa Joe or CM Punk. So he starts to bulk up. He's eating more. He's changed his diet. He's lifting more, and he's trying to put on a bigger frame. In 05, when did that culture change? Is there a moment that you remember, or a talent or an angle, a piece of business, whatever, where you thought, okay, that's no longer necessary. We don't need to have behemoths anymore.
It was around that time because at the same time that we were bringing in Daniel Bryan would be a great example for that, because here's a guy that's 5'8" or 9, just absolutely an amazing in-ring tactician, one that his skill set would be successful in any era that I've worked in my lifetime in wrestling. And I think Punk fit right into that same mold. You got highly skilled guys, very motivated. They really, really wanted to be in WWE, and maybe not just because of the money, but because of the status and the fact that WWE was always the goal. You know, it's easy to say, and I'm not knocking XFL, but if you're an American football player playing American tackle football, and you want to do it for a living, the first choice is always the National Football League. And I think the WWE serves that purpose for a lot of the boys. It's their NFL. And so getting to that level, getting on an NFL team was a huge deal. So, you know, he was one of those guys that had just a fantastic skill set. He had that great verbal ability to express himself. And he incorporated some MMA stuff, maybe a little bit more submission stuff that other people, you know, may not have utilized as effectively. But Punk and Daniel Bryan, I would say, are two of the leading guys that made this thing work. And I think when I signed Rey Mysterio, that didn't hurt anything because, you know, Rey is so good, we don't think about how small he is. He's not a big guy, except he's got big talent. But things like that contributed to, Conrad, to your question about when that started going away, and the size thing. That I think, I believe that it was a process, but a Rey Mysterio contributed to it. Punk, and Punk was 6'1" or so. You know, he could stand to bulk up a little bit, and he did. But you know, I don't know, man. I think that Punk and Daniel Bryan, all those Ring of Honor guys that Laurinaitis went in and signed, would be contributing factors to that size conundrum that had been a problem or been an issue in WWE for many, many years.
Well, it's that time of the show. It's time to talk about getting your dick hard. And if you like sex, man, you're going to love BlueChew.com. It's going to make it better. It's going to get you real, real hard. Blue Chew offers men a performance enhancement for the bedroom. Wouldn't you like to last a little longer? Go a few extra rounds? Well, at BlueChew.com, you get the world's first chewable. It's got the same active ingredients as Viagra and Cialis, but it can work up to twice as fast because it's a chewable. So why wouldn't you want this? And how about this? It's also cheaper and easier to get than those other two big brand names you're familiar with, because you get to skip the in-person doctor's visit. Instead, you just talk to an affiliated physician right there at BlueChew.com. They'll help you find the right active ingredient and the right dosage, whatever's best for you. But you can take this on a full or empty stomach, so that's a leg up. And it's cheaper because you don't have to go to the doc. So why wouldn't you do this? Oh, by the way, it's also more discreet. You don't have to go wait in line at the pharmacy, no awkward conversation. Instead, just shows up at your door direct. And it's made right here in the US of A, so you gotta love that. But you're really gonna love the confidence it gives you in bed every time. You won't be the only one who loves it. Your partner will too. So chew it and for you guys. Go to BlueChew.com and get your first order for free when you use promo code JR. Just pay $5 shipping. That's BlueChew.com, and the promo code is JR. I'm telling you, this stuff is legit. Well, CM Punk finally gets his big break, and he's going to debut on TV for ECW. I guess we should mention he did have a cameo at WrestleMania 22, playing one of John Cena's gangsters. And that's pretty common. You go back and see the Undertaker's entrance a few years ago, and it was a lot of, quote unquote, underneath talent. And even Triple H, you know, at WrestleMania in 2014, he had, I think it was Alexa Bliss and Sasha Banks and Charlotte Flair, helping with his entrance. So that's sort of a rite of passage for a lot of developmental talents. But once he's on TV for ECW. So they're going to relaunch ECW and task Paul Heyman with trying to make that show successful. And of course, one of the talents he wants to feature is CM Punk. And while not a lot of great stuff comes from this relaunch of ECW, I don't know that he would have had the opportunity to shine on the big stage with, I don't know, the right lens had Paul Heyman not been there to shepherd it. And ECW certainly provided that. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Heyman was good at putting shine on talents. Paul had learned these skills early on. and as I did from the standpoint of as a booker, not a writer, different role. Now we've talked about this here on the show. A booker and a writer are different entities. Are just different. There's apples and oranges here. But Heyman was good at just evaluating a talent, and then booking them to play to their strengths, and put them in positions where they are good at executing a specific thing. If that makes any sense to you folks, it's just Heyman was just good at you don't put a talent in a position that they don't shine. And here's the best analogy. I tell young talents this all the time. You don't need to work on your punches in practice, because that's an ancillary part of wrestling is throwing punches. It should still be illegal, in my opinion. If the heels have no reels to break, then they're screwed, and you can't get heat on a heel that isn't good about breaking the rules and lying about it to some degree. So that's how that worked. But Heyman was really good at hiding weaknesses and exploiting strengths, and he was able to do that with Punk. And I think what it also did, his interactions with Punk Heyman's interactions with Punk gave Punk confidence that he's on the right track. So I think there's a lot of wins with the Heyman-Punk relationship. And but and Heyman again did a great job of identifying a really rough but top talent that we could utilize.
We should mention that now not only is he given an opportunity to tell his straight edge story on camera, but he's also presented with a Muay Thai background, and he does sort of the wrist roll, the old famous Vanderlei Silva. Yeah. And you can tell that he has a big MMA influence and a big fan of that. And Paul puts him in good spots against a lot of old ECW talent like C.W. Anderson and Stevie Richards and Just Incredible. But he gets really his big break, probably teaming with D-Generation X and the Hardy Boys in a Survivor Series match. And, knowing what we know now about, the rumor and innuendo that maybe Triple H wasn't the biggest CM Punk fan, that's an interesting pairing. Punk with the Hardys, maybe I could see it, but Punk with Shawn Michaels and Triple H, a couple of guys who have a reputation for not always being the friendliest of guys with young talent. And I think at different times, they've both been rather vocal about their opinions backstage. Chat me up. What'd you think of this pairing? And, did you have a specific conversation with either Shawn Michaels or Triple H about CM Punk?
I don't recall having a specific conversation. I think that, quite honestly, if I was guessing what Triple H's issues with Punk would be Punk's physique and how he looked, and that because he did not look like a guy that was a future WWE champion in the eyes of a lot of people. But here's the thing, man. His skill sets for all of this stuff was great. And so I think their issues, quite frankly, was more like on how he looked in their view, and not how he worked. So, but here's the other thing about that. Once they saw how good he was, I think some of that scuttlebutt and the little whispers about Punk's physique, or his arms aren't big enough, or he didn't have a big enough shoulder, some of that bullshit. That he, after they saw what he was all about. I think that the bitching subsided to some degree, but because of his lifestyle, he believed in it, he preached it, he talked about it. I think that he still has some bullshit to deal with, but it was less because it was obvious he was going to be a top star. And if you see somebody that's a real good worker that does not have a reputation for hurting people, then it encourages the more established incumbents to want to work with him too. And I kind of think that's where that thing went, and which is we'll talk about it here in a second, but that's kind of like where The Undertaker came in. I think Taker wanted to work with Punk because he saw something special in this guy, and Taker's a team player. To get another star over, just helps them draw more money, which they all share. So I think that was more of a physique thing than anything else. On Hunter's part, maybe Shawn would have followed Hunter along more usually, So, but I think it's what it was, just a physique thing and kind of weak. It's kind of weak reason not to like somebody if that is the case.
The worst pay-per-view of all time, December to Dismember, features an Elimination Chamber match. And Bruce Pritchard has told us that he remembers Paul Heyman campaigning really, really hard that the Big Show should be the first person eliminated, and it should happen within seconds because CM Punk tapped him out. And of course, that's not what wound up happening. Paul Heyman, that would be the end of him sort of running ECW, and he's going to be asked to go home. And instead of tapping out Big Show right away, he's actually the first person eliminated, and it happens at the hands of Mr. Rob Van Dam. Do you remember December to Dismember and this debacle?
I remember that. It was a debacle. Too many cooks in the kitchen, too many random agendas. You know, the ECW phenomenon is pretty incredible. You know, I was and still am a fan of their product. I love listening to Bubba Dudley talk about his ECW days fondly and glowingly on Busted Open Radio, my favorite radio show, with Dave LaGreca and the crew. Love those guys. But I think sometimes the love of ECW is sometimes misguided to the standpoint that it's hard for me to fathom that there would be an ECW that created by Paul Heyman if there had not been a Mid-South Wrestling that Paul Heyman watched as a tape trader and a fan, because the ECW physicality, the blood, the guts, and the beer, the fighting, the brawling was very prominent on Mid-South long before ECW was created. So I think that the Mid-South had something to do with the ECW stylings. Big fan of it. So, but the thing I'm trying to say is that the ECW brand, to those that were committed to it, is still a very special thing. And if you, like I said, you listen to Bubba or some of these other guys that were ECW guys, they had the jersey, the first helmet, they were in the game. You'll hear that it was a special place. But Paul tried so hard to resurrect it and make it a special place that it sometimes alienated some folks. But Paul can be very persistent. And I remember talking to Paul one time. He wanted to do, he was pitching creative some program for Little Guido, one of his ECW boys, and I can't remember, James Marito, I think is his last name. Great guy, but he's small. I said, Paul, you're dying on the wrong hill, man. You're bugging the hell out of Vince, because I've just said, if Heyman hits me one more time about doing this big angle with Little Guido, I'm going to kill him, type thing, tongue in cheek. But Paul was that persistent. If he was that persistent on Little Guido, you can only imagine how persistent he was on CM Punk. There are different talents there now. And Little Guido's a fundamentally sound, good guy. You want him on your team. You want him in the locker room, but you don't want him to main event in the card. And I'm not saying Paul wanted to be the main eventer, but he indicated that he had that potential to get over and be a star. And nobody believed Paul on that one or will go along with it. So that's kind of that, Conrad. The Heyman had a way of ruffling the feathers, and he wanted to resurrect ECW so badly that he was willing to put himself on jeopardy, and it bit him in the ass because, as you said, Vince had heard enough, and Paul was no longer involved in the ECW production. It just was not going to be resurrected. It was a brand that had its run. It was a great run. The WWE bought the library. We helped fund them for a while. All that was good stuff, no problem. We signed some really good talents from ECW, much like Laurinaitis did in the mid-2000s with the Ring of Honor guys that we're talking about. So I think Punk was but he came out of it okay. Even though he lost his guardian angel and his biggest supporter officially, I'm sure that Punk and Heyman continued to talk and strategize and game plan all along.
Once Punk or once Heyman leaves, Punk is put into a feud with Hardcore Holly, who's going to finally end Punk's unbeaten streak in singles competition, which I guess was like 6 months or so. And then he finds himself qualifying for the Money in the Bank ladder match at WrestleMania. And that's a pretty big deal, because he hasn't really been featured in these type situations before. He winds up joining the New Breed Alliance. And so you've got sort of the New Breed version of ECW with the ECW originals on the other side. And he's going to start using a go to sleep finisher, which I think a lot of wrestling fans remember was a move made famous over in Japan by Kenta, who's recently returned and I believe is now a part of the Bullet Club. So I guess next we should mention that, it's not all roses for Punk and ECW or WWE once Heyman is on the sidelines. And specifically, in the DVD that you guys released, or I guess WWE released several years ago, you said that Punk made the potential cut list several times during this era, but somehow Paul Heyman, even though he was not booking ECW anymore, he still was participating in some of the calls. He would always campaign and fight for Punk. How close to being cut was Punk? I mean, it feels like for whatever reason, some of the higher ups maybe just weren't sold on him yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. He was, it wasn't a, I don't want to, it really in the practical application of this question and this matter, Punk was never really treated overly fair as the personal interaction of a talent. He was not outgoing. He was certainly not an ass kisser. And if you're not a sycophant sometimes, and that's the only thing that was making you stand out to ingratiate yourself to all the decision makers, you find yourself being dealt a tough hand. But as he became more valuable as a commodity, and I can tell you this, the fans did that. The wrestling fans themselves started buying into Punk's persona. They started buying into his quote unquote act, if you will, his presentation. And they loved what he brought to the table because he was so different and so unique. And it was very, very obvious that CM Punk was not a creation of the office. And sometimes when you come into WWE already with your quote unquote gimmick or your name or whatever, sometimes it's a rough start. Sometimes you don't get that running start that you'd like to have because the WWE did not create you in that respect. They're going to refine you and make you better. It comes down to communication and ego. And Punk was a quiet, introverted guy. Oftentimes in that environment, I didn't find it ever to be sullen or moody to me because I understood him. And also, I was not in a position at that time to really influence much of his career other than calling a match here, there, and yon because Laurinaitis had taken that role. And I don't know how Laurinaitis and Punk got along. I know that sometimes you get a talent that you could say is a quote unquote high maintenance. Stone Cold Steve Austin was high maintenance. He didn't trust anybody. He had a great sense of what he was doing and what he could do well, what he didn't do well. He also had a feeling about, his how he interacted. Austin was not the most social guy in the world. He became that more often because when you become more accepted, then it's easier to get more involved in this thing from an emotional standpoint. But Punk was a lot like Austin in that regard. You had to get to know him, but you wanted to get to know him better once you saw that some of this was a real deal. And Punk was the real deal, much like Stone Cold. So there's nothing wrong with being quote unquote high maintenance. It's up to the administrator to figure out what it's going to take to communicate with the high maintenance talent. And as we did with Steve, and as I don't think that they quite got to that level of Punk. I just don't think that he got embraced because of who he was, how he looked, his lifestyle, all those things. For some reason, just didn't appease or appeal to some of the higher ups there, as you mentioned. And it's unfortunate because he was never a bad guy.
All right, you've probably heard all about the possible applications for CBD in the news or from some family and friends. Well, now it's time to discover its benefits for yourself with premium CBD topicals from CBD MD. CBD MD's freeze and recover formulas combine the power of CBD with established pain-relieving and anti-inflammatory agents to provide fast, targeted relief. Naturally sourced from hemp grown right here in the USA using organic farming methods, you just can't beat this stuff. CBD MD. Their freeze and recover formulas have a third-party laboratory-tested, proven method to ensure a clean and safe product. They've got award-winning customer service, and you know it's good stuff when you can offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. They're trusted by world-class athletes across a wide range of sports, and I'm talking about big names. How about Bubba Watson from PGA? Yeah, that's right, the two-time Masters champ. How about Daniel Cormier? He's held UFC gold in both the light heavyweight and heavyweight division. Steve Smith Sr., you know he's a bona fide NFL Hall of Famer. How about Lolo Jones or Kerry Walsh Jennings and many, many more. But CBD isn't just for elite athletes. Whether you're making a championship run or need a little push to get through the day, CBD MD is committed to making CBD affordable and accessible to everyone. And I got to tell you, when this showed up at the house, I was excited to use it. I tore my ACL and MCL years ago in football. It has given me lots of nagging injuries and aches and pains, and sometimes it's hard just moving around in the morning. I'm telling you, this stuff has really, really helped. My wife suffers from a different type of knee injury that she's had. She's tried it. She loves it too. And you will. You got to discover what CBD can do for you. And how about this? You get a special offer here. Not only do you get a 30-day money-back guarantee, how about 20% off CBD MD's already affordable prices? Just use our promo code GRILL when you're at checkout at cbdmd.com. That's cbdmd.com. One more time, cbdmd.com, and use our promo code GRILL, and you're going to get 20% off your next order of all your premium CBD oils and products from CBD MD. Check it out. This stuff is legit. I can't recommend this enough. cbdmd.com. Use that promo code GRILL. I'm telling you, you'll be glad you did. Let's talk about the boys for a minute, because I feel like sometimes the internet, wrestling community has their favorites, and when they become sort of mobilized, say, hey, he's our guy, and we're all cheering for this one guy, and we want him to do well, and we want him to succeed, and we think he's great. He gets sort of a tag for indie darling. And so I feel like whenever a guy comes in from the independents with a lot of hype and a big reputation, some of the other guys who are already in the locker room probably roll their eyes at that. And John Cena, on that same DVD we referenced earlier, said when he finally saw CM Punk after all the hype and reputation, he thought, that's it. Is that a fair assessment that maybe some of the folks who are on the main roster, who perhaps aren't given an opportunity on TV every single week to really show what they're capable of, when a guy comes in from the indies with a lot of hype and a big reputation, they're sort of looked at maybe a little sideways, like, what's the big fucking deal?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it comes back to physique. Think about it. So Cena said in this, and I didn't see the DVD, but I know, I remember it, and I remember it, selling pretty well, as a matter of fact. But Cena's assessment was based on look. You can't make an assessment on somebody by saying, I finally saw this guy and I said, this is it. He didn't even know him. Hadn't met him. Didn't have a relationship with him. It's the eyeball test. And, even though Punk was great conditioned, but he didn't have that bodybuilder's physique. Now I'll tell you, he started adding some bulk, and his nutrition, I'm sure, improved, and he started going to the gym more, and working on his body. But yeah, man, it was not fair in that regard. Hey, it's also the same thing. Go back and think about this. In I think it was, when was it? 2000 and Here's the deal. A couple of things. He got a 5-star match, did Punk, with Samoa Joe by Dave Meltzer's Wrestling Observer newsletter. That would get around. Some of the guys looked at that as a great accomplishment. And some of the guys who weren't getting those 5-star ratings looked at it as bullshit. So a lot of little things like that made him, that, as you mentioned very accurately, the internet darling. But to say, well, I saw him and this is it, John had not even seen Punk work as far as I know.
Right.
So it's hard. How do you make an assessment on that? And as a responsible producer, why would you allow a talent to say something that's so self-incriminating and it just didn't hold water? So I don't know how that worked either, but nonetheless, it goes back to the same thing, man. You talked earlier about Triple H and Shawn not being big fans of Punk. Were they not big fans of Punk's because he didn't do drugs? No. Or drink? No. And by the way, Triple H doesn't do drugs or drink either. So I didn't never understand that. But the deal comes back. Does he have the look that we, as in WWE, covet for a spot on our roster, or especially on a main event level situation? And that was where that came about right there. Just simply, he didn't have a bodybuilder physique, but he had the body of an athlete and as a wrestler. And then again, as I said, Conrad, when some of these cats saw how well he could work and how he could adapt his style to incorporate with yours to make it a more seamless presentation, then everybody wanted to work with him because they saw this son of a gun is really, really good. And he can make me look good, and we could have some great matches.
So let's talk about WrestleMania 23. It's his first WrestleMania with the company, and where he's actually in a match, and it's the Money in the Bank ladder match. Big deal for him to qualify in that. Ultimately, his number's not called there. Mr. Kennedy comes up successful, but the big thing we would see happen next, or of note that we should bring up, is the Vengeance pay-per-view in June of that year. He was scheduled to face Chris Benoit for the ECW title. But we all know that the Benoit tragedy happened, and as a result, that match does not take place. Johnny Nitro is in the match instead, and Nitro wins the match and becomes the ECW champion. And Punk has said that he didn't feel like Nitro was ready. He felt like he was more ready at the time, but that's the decision that was made. And you guys do eventually flip-flop the title on in September, where Punk would beat Morrison for the belt. And then in January of 2008, Chavo would beat Punk with a little help from Edge to win the ECW champion. But the championship, finally being around his waist and it being his first, taste of gold in the WWE, even though it's not the original ECW, it is a reboot, and it is at a time when Heyman is not there writing it. It had to be, kind of a cool moment, because the original ECW would have been a great fit for Punk. But I think it's pretty common knowledge that as far as the pecking order of championships, the ECW world title was way down the ladder from the other two at this time. Fair to say?
Oh yeah. Way down the ladder. And, trying to reposition ECW as a viable brand was mainly the goal of a lot of ECW loyalists and underneath talents that were not firmly placed on the Raw or SmackDown roster, but had grown up watching ECW and were fans of the product. And they saw it as their opportunity to get in the game and get television time if the ECW television show found its way on TV. I think that the way I remember that, I didn't call a lot of ECW matches then, but I remember that he stood out over almost anybody. So he was red hot. So my point was the ECW title change and this, I think, was just basically a way to get him disassociated with ECW sooner than later, so that he could go to Raw or SmackDown, because finally the light was shining on Punk that this guy is good, and we can get more mileage out of him on Raw or SmackDown than we ever will on trying to do a rebooted ECW.
Here's my question, I guess. Do you think that perhaps he was given this ECW belt almost as a way to sort of placate, like, hey, we don't think he's ready for prime time. We don't think he's ready to be one of the big boys, but since everybody loves him so much, here, this will pacify everybody. Here's your little title here.
Maybe. I mean, it could have been. That's kind of weak in my view. Not what you said, but I can understand your question. And it could have been. It could have been that to some degree.
I guess my point is making someone ECW champion doesn't necessarily mean the office is behind you. I mean, it's not on that caliber.
No. I think it only meant that they saw his talent. They started believing in him more. Whether he's ever going to be on somebody's come to Christmas dinner at somebody's house, or on the birthday card list or whatever, probably ain't going to happen with him, because he didn't try to make that happen. He didn't care about having personal relationships. It didn't seem to me like he was all about business. Nothing wrong with that either.
Got a question for you. How'd you sleep last night? Spend the night tossing and turning? If you've been waking up with a stiff neck or some back pain, man, maybe it's time to get the solution you've been looking for. Maybe it's time you got a good night's sleep. How about Purple Mattress can help? Here's why I believe in Purple Mattress. This is a couple of brothers who've been developing cushioning technology for like 30 years for medical beds and wheelchairs. But a few years ago, 2016 in fact, they decided to take their patented comfort technology and create the world's most scientific mattress. It's probably going to feel different than anything you've ever felt before because it's a brand new material developed by freaking rocket scientists. No, it's not memory foam, but it feels very unique because it's both firm and soft at the same time, but it keeps everything supported and it's also really comfortable. What's most important for me though is it's breathable. I run hot and this helps me keep cool. And you know that it's a good product when they can hit you with this. How about a 100-night risk-free trial? If you're not fully satisfied, you can return your mattress for a full refund, backed by a 10-year warranty. You get free shippings and returns. And how about free in-home setup and old mattress removal? You just can't beat this. Don't take my word for it. Check it out. You're going to love Purple. And right now, our listeners will get a free Purple pillow with the purchase to the great free gifts they're offering site-wide. Just text JR to 84-888. The only way to get this free pillow is to text JR to 84888. That's JR to 84888. Message and data rates may apply, but Purple is legit. You got to try it out.
Punk was all about business, Conrad, all about the business and not a social party. Again, I say a twinkle in my eye and tongue in my cheek about the females that seem to really like him. That was a great thing about it. If the whole roster would have opened their arms, so to speak, as the ladies did, he'd been the most popular guy on the roster. My hero. So, but that's just him, man. Again, we were talking about this earlier. In charge of talent relations, man, you've got to make sure that you know how to communicate with the talent. I use the Austin example. You got to know how to communicate with the talent. That's your job. And I'm not so sure that anybody in power, including Laurinaitis, who would have been Punk's conduit to Vince, did a great job in communicating with Punk. Maybe they did. I wasn't there day to day in that regard. I'd already been replaced. But that's how I would have worked with him. I'd spent a lot of time with the guy so that he had one guy he could go to that he knew would be honest and fair with him. And I don't know that he ever felt that way under the Laurinaitis regime. And that's my assessment. It sounds like sour grapes to me. Poor JR, he's not head of talent relations anymore, blah, blah, blah. But that's kind of what it felt like to me.
The 2008 Money in the Bank match at WrestleMania is a big moment for Punk. He's in here with Carlito, Chris Jericho, John Morrison, MVP, Mr. Kennedy, Shelton Benjamin, and Punk wins the thing. And not too terribly long after that, he's drafted to Raw. And his first night on Raw the following week, he cashes in his Money in the Bank after Batista was beat down, or after Batista has beaten down the world champion Edge, rather, and he wins the title. And this is a big moment for Punk. Obviously, now this is not the ECW title. This is the World Heavyweight Championship on Raw. And to get a win over Edge and then defend his title against JBL the same night, pretty cool moment for him. You know, no, I don't think, a lot of people maybe saw this coming, that he would right after the draft win the world title, but nice little piece of business, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. And the lights, the bulb had gone off in the power brokers' minds that the fans are telling us we're on to something. And oftentimes WWE has been blamed for not listening to the fans and reacting accordingly to what the fans are telling them, because the folks that buy tickets and come to live events, that make the effort to get to a live event, the parking, the admission, the hot dogs, the souvenirs, whatever it may be, it's not a cheap proposition. And I just think that, you know, Punk was the kind of guy that the audience lifted on their shoulders, they embraced him, and they carried Punk to the promised land. Did they, meaning the fans themselves? And that's, to me, that was always the best judge for him, is that you get that direct market research, those guys that made the attempt to get from their house to the arena and sat there for a show. And then when he came out, it was amazing. And a lot of that some of that had to do with his music. You know, I remember Jan loved when Punk would come out, because she loved the cult of personality.
Well, that wasn't it yet. He wasn't using that one just yet here, not until after the pipe bomb, but we're on our way there. But this is still a big moment. You know, the pipe bomb happened June 27th. He wins the world title on June 30th, a few years prior. So June, for whatever reason, late June was Punk's time, man. And I've always wondered this, though. You know, you sort of give credit to the WWE brass and say, hey, they're finally listening to the audience. This win to me felt a little bit like, hey, we're just doing this to have a swerve, to have a surprise, hey, nobody's going to see it coming. And I say that because when he defends his title against JBL that night, he doesn't just beat JBL clean. He has some help from John Cena and Crime Time, and Michael Hayes is even on that same DVD we've referenced, saying that a lot of the guys, people in the locker room and the office, felt like Punk tarnished the championship. And a lot of the maybe elder statesmen in the locker room felt like they were giving him the title too soon or prematurely, or it was the wrong move. So this feels like maybe somebody on the booking or writing team felt like, hey, they won't see this coming. This is a surprise, but they didn't really take him seriously. And I can support that by saying he loses the belt by not even being in the match. He's supposed to be headlining Unforgiven. It's a multi-man match. And Randy Orton and his faction punt CM Punk before the show starts, and he drops the title without ever losing it and doesn't even appear in the pay-per-view where he was supposed to be defending his title in the main event. It feels like Punk as a championship is sort of an afterthought. And I think somewhere in here, Triple H was quoted as saying sometimes the guy makes the belt and sometimes the belt makes the guy. And in this case, it was maybe neither one. What do you think of the way he was booked as champion once he is champion? Because it doesn't feel like a vote of confidence, at least to me.
Yeah, I never heard senior members of the roster complaining about Punk in that regard that Hayes described. I'm not calling Hayes a liar because I wasn't there. He was embedded in all that creative writing bullshit with those guys. Bottom line is that objectivity sometimes is a lost asset within pro wrestling. Objectivity, it becomes more personal. I just saw that. I think some of those guys just looked at Punk and said, well, he doesn't look like us. He's not WWE main event material. But so your question is well put and probably has a great deal of validity to it. But I say, guys that I never had a talent come to me and say anything about this in passing conversation about Punk in a negative way ever. Only a few guys thought his body was not good. I remember somebody saying, well, his ass is too big. His ass is too big and it's too soft. And, wait a minute, where are we here? What are we doing? The crowd's telling you this guy's over. Our job is to put an ass every 18 inches in the stands.
Listen, I can't not ask this. Who the fuck said his ass is too big?
Hunter.
Oh my God.
Too big. He's got this wasn't it's all about the workout shit, man. and how he looked in an 8x10 or whatever. He's not going to look the same because he's not the same. And if all you're going to do is put out androids all look alike, then what the hell you got? You got no uniqueness. You got no individuality. So that was the whole deal. I think that the consensus was this guy may not be in great shape because he looks soft. And I'm saying that his softness, as far as his ass was concerned, or his ass issue, which is a non-issue in my view, was basically based on the fact that the perception was he had a oversized soft ass. Silly as it sounds, it's so absurd it doesn't make any sense. And I swear to God, folks, I'm not making this up. But that was the whole deal. And finally, through hell and high water, he plowed through this bullshit and became the star that he is. And really, he had a Hall of Fame level career there. There's no doubt about that. Will he ever be in the Hall of Fame? I wouldn't want to bet on that one. And I'm not so sure he would even accept it if it was offered.
It's so weird that we're even having conversations like that. But I mean, I guess that's wrestling.
It's show business, Conrad. It's goddamn show business. And it's unfair to anybody that's being persecuted in that regard. It's not fair. It's being like a bully because you got the stroke. It's not good. And I just don't like that, the singling people out in that regard, especially somebody that can go, and Punk could go.
So after he loses the world title, he has to figure out what's next. And what's next is he's going to team with his old pal Kofi Kingston. They're going to beat Cody Rhodes and Ted DiBiase and become world tag team champions. That doesn't last too terribly long, but eventually he gets a shot at the Intercontinental title. He's successful there. He becomes a Grand Slam winner as a result. And I mean, I guess, from a historical standpoint, that's kind of cool, but he really starts to make headway at the next WrestleMania when he wins the Money in the Bank ladder match again. He's the first person to win that match twice. And not too terribly long after this, he's going to cash in to defeat Jeff Hardy to win the world championship right after Hardy had beaten Edge in a ladder match. So that happens on June 7th. And now all of a sudden we're trying it again. When you see that we're essentially doing a repeat of the old storyline, Edge is involved in a world title match. Punk has just won the Money in the Bank. I mean, and now Punk's going to cash in and win the belt. It is an exact retread. Did you have higher hopes this time? Did you think maybe this one may go a little better than the first one?
It is all going to depend about the politics of the whole scenario. And anytime we talk about CM Punk's career in WWE or wherever it may be, you got to talk about politics because that's what he was the victim of. And I'm not going to say it was we put all of it on WWE because generally when you have that sort of conflict, interpersonal conflict, it takes two to tango to some degree. But I think all in all, Punk was an overt victim of unfortunate, ill-timed politics in his run at WWE. And despite of all that, in spite of all those pushbacks, look at the run he had. That shows you how good he really was. And I think the original, they're doing that angle over. Somebody says, well, that was going to work. People love the guy, and he got a great pop. He gets a great reaction. He's selling lots of merchandise. Blah blah blah. All the measurables are there, and maybe smoother heads prevailed. I think that even the people that didn't like him probably started seeing the quality of his matches. And the other thing is that when Undertaker was very happy to work with Punk and to have their program, and they had some really significant matches, that told me all I needed to know about Hayes' comment about a lot of the older talents didn't like the way he treated the belt or whatever it may be. I don't know what the hell that means. You mean allowing the talents to walk out with the belt around their shoulder or around their neck?
Oh, no. I don't think he means that. I think the idea was that he wasn't, what they perceived a champion should be. Like maybe
based on what? His look?
It gotta be, right. It's gotta be his look or his presentation or his demeanor, or I don't know. It's just weird that so many people are so sort of polarized by him, but he winds up flip-flopping the world title a little bit here with Jeff Hardy. We just covered what happened at the end of SummerSlam 2009. Of course, Jeff Hardy's going to leave for some greener pastures. Punk is going to win the belt back here, only to be attacked by The Undertaker. And he's going to immediately do a loser leaves the company match with Jeff Hardy. Somewhere in here, by the way, they had a really cool little piece of business that I don't think a lot of people talk about very much, but we had CM Punk dress up like Jeff Hardy. So he's coming out dressed like Jeff Hardy and dancing like Jeff Hardy and playing Jeff Hardy's music. And it looks and feels like Jeff Hardy, but it's actually CM Punk. And I think that feud, while it may not have been one that people still talk about to this day, is probably a little underrated. I really enjoyed Jeff Hardy and Matt Hardy together, or Jeff and CM Punk here together.
Yeah. Great chemistry. They got along well. They fit. It was a social fit, and I say that, and not with tongue in cheek, but Jeff Hardy was also kind of an outcast. And a lot of that was because of the perception that Jeff had created for himself of not always making the greatest decisions, et cetera, et cetera. But the irony of that deal, too, is that unlike Punk, it was very difficult to ever not like Jeff. Jeff was very likable, and he felt empathy for him for some of the struggles that he had, but no one could ever discount Jeff's ability in the ring. I love the Hardy Boy tag team, but in all due respect to Matt, who should be a great booker someday or a administrator, Jeff was easy to like. CM Punk, personality-wise, not so much. There was a difference there. But boy, when they got in the ring, they came together, those diverse personalities, and made some great music. Some of the more fun matches we had during that era was involving Hardy and Punk.
I want to talk about the Undertaker feud, because he's going to feud with the Undertaker next. He's going to have some pay-per-view matches with him. He's going to do everything he can to cheat, and he picks up a win, and then they come back and set it up in a Hell in a Cell match, which I think has flown below the radar a little bit. And the Undertaker is successful, tries a couple of different repeat opportunities, not successful, and then he decides to take a more sinister direction, and he starts, I don't know, he becomes like a cult-like leader with the Straight Edge Society. He recruits Luke Gallows, and he's going to grow his hair out, and he's going to grow his beard out, and he's going to try to have some planted members of the audience, and he's going to convert them to a straight edge lifestyle, and they're going to take a pledge of allegiance to him by shaving their head as a sign of renewal and devotion. This is some good stuff. And I don't think anything like this had been done in wrestling. So I don't know why this wasn't a bigger part of the presentation, but I think this idea and concept is really, really good.
Me too. And the reason it didn't get any more publicity and better positioning was because it surrounded Punk. And again, Punk was a polarizing figure in the front office. This has been well documented. I thought that, I remember there when they shaved the head of Serena Deep. She's by the way, she's really, really talented. I think she's working with WWE. I think last I heard she was working with WWE as a coach. Really talented. Had a great life story. Now she's resurrected her personal life and her professional career as well. So they did good. And then that was a big break for Gallows, who's now, he's involved with the not Bullet Club, but the club, and with AJ and Carl Anderson and so forth. But that gave Gallows a pulse, and it gave Serena a pulse through the vehicle of CM Punk. But it was a very underrated faction. And I remember, again, as I said, Serena getting her head shaved on television. And that took some I started to say some balls. I guess it took some ovaries. But it was bold. But they all bought into the entire presentation. And you can't not respect that. It's just they're committed. And that's what you always look for in that regard. commitment, and they had it.
Yeah, they definitely had it. And this was a fun angle, a fun storyline. And I guess we should mention there is a match in here where there's some real stakes where he's trying to recruit Rey Mysterio. Then it becomes a feud with Mysterio. And ultimately, Punk has to have his head shaven, but he doesn't want to look like one of his followers. So he starts to wear a mask, and eventually he's unmasked. So some old school, fun, silly stuff here. But I guess we should just skip ahead because the real rubber meets the road when Punk's contract is about to come due. And while he may have been an Intercontinental Champion and an ECW champion and a tag champion and flip-flopped the world title a few times, he's just not happy, and he feels burnt out, and he knows he's not the guy. And on that DVD we've referenced a few times already today, I mean, Triple H basically said he was never positioned as the guy. And it was like, even when we gave you the belt, well, you're not really the guy. We're just going to give this for you a little while, and then we're going to take it back. And unbelievably, the creative is, hey, you get to air your grievances with a live microphone. And that goes down on June 27th, 2011 in Las Vegas. And it's the famous pipe bomb promo. And, it gets over so huge, it becomes the most viral thing in wrestling in years. I mean, years and years. And as a result, the match now at Money in the Bank has a whole new layer. And they build to this for a few weeks, and then the match happens in Chicago, Money in the Bank 2011. If you're going to watch one match this week to get ready for CM Punk returning to the wrestling space, you got to watch him in his hometown defeat John Cena for the world title on his quote unquote last night in the company. Now, behind the scenes, I guess at that very event, I believe CM Punk signed a new contract. Is that right?
I think so. I think he did. Here's the thing about that is that it speaks to a bigger picture. Why would, if you didn't have complete faith from your boss and your upper management and yourself, why would Laurinaitis wait till the sands of the hourglass are running thin to start negotiations and get this thing signed? It's always going to be about two issues, Conrad: cash and creative. The guy was rode hard, put up wet. He hardly ever missed a shot. If he did, I don't recall him. But this speaks to the lack of respect and confidence that the upper management had in him. Still, after all he had done, after working with The Undertaker, for example, I don't remember Taker ever having one issue with working with Punk. Rey Mysterio had no issues working with Punk. So in the video that Hayes is describing, a lot of the older veterans didn't like this or that. I'm not saying, again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not there to hear all this dialogue with Michael, but I never got that from anybody. I never got it from anybody that. All I got from anybody negative about CM Punk was that he's a different breed of cat. He could be a strange guy, and that's because he was not overly extroverted. So in other words, he wasn't fake. He wasn't a sycophant. He was not an ass kisser. And because that was so contrary to the normal behavior of a top guy in any wrestling territory that I've ever been in, any of them, that he was just a different breed of cat, and folks did not know how to deal with him. And simple as that. Bad communication, and he didn't have the support in the front office that he should have had. And that's really, really sad.
It is sad. But he makes the most of it here because he gets over like nobody's business. And he becomes, as a result of this 5-star match and this performance here at Money in the Bank, the hottest, I mean, seriously, the hottest name in wrestling. And not too terribly long after winning the belt, he makes a surprise appearance at the San Diego Comic-Con. And they've booked this and presented this like he's no longer under contract, but he is the champion and he's left with the belt. And he's name dropping, hey, I might go to New Japan. Hey, I might go to Ring of Honor. This added a layer of realism and intrigue that hasn't existed in not just WWE, but wrestling in years at this point.
And again, a lot of that was his idea. A lot of that was his execution. The execution was all him. And sometimes that will alienate one from the very sensitive writing team. Their idea got shit on, or their idea got improved immensely by letting the talent have input, which should be ongoing with every talent on the roster or anybody's company, AEW included. The talents have got to, like Junkyard Dog used to say, don't come to the arena like a cabbage, all head and no rear end. You got to have ideas, and you got to pitch the ideas, and you can't be BS. I give the comparison earlier of Punk and Austin. Still think folks should go see that video. Find it, 2K, Austin, and Punk. You'll love it, and you'll wish you'll just make you Jones for the match, quite frankly, but it'll also show how good they were. But that Punk was a lot like Austin in that regard. You couldn't be BS'd. He knew what a good angle was. He knew what a good storyline was that fit him, and so that was the same situation there with him. He just was a guy that knew what he needed to do to get over, and guys like that, you let them write their own music, man. They're going to sing it. They're going to perform it. Let them have some hand in writing their music. And finally, I think WWE, maybe by accident, I'm not even sure, or maybe they thought it wouldn't get over. Let's just let him bury himself. I don't have no idea, but it worked. He got over, and he was, like you said, Conrad. At one time, CM Punk was without a doubt the hottest talent in all of pro wrestling, in any continent, anywhere, any promotion. He was the guy for a good period of time. And as an administrator, as a responsible administrator, how do you ignore that? How do you ignore that when they're having a problem as it is, as do most wrestling companies, and getting talents over to that star level where they are at the top of the card, name before the title type guy. And he was that guy, and it just was like an act of God to get that recognized.
Of course, in storyline, they're going to decide that, hey, Punk's no longer with us. We're going to crown a new champion. And of course, they decide to have an undisputed championship match when John Cena is going to defend his world title against CM Punk and his world title at SummerSlam. Punk wins the match, but then immediately loses it to Alberto Del Rio because Alberto is going to cash in. And a returning Kevin Nash is here to attack CM Punk on behalf of Triple H. And after SummerSlam, that becomes, the new direction. Punk is accusing Nash of conspiring with Triple H to keep Punk away from the title. And during their verbal back and forths, and there were some memorable moments on TV, we would hear Kevin Nash demean the look. And I think at one point Nash referred to, said that CM Punk looked like someone who worked the third shift at the Waffle House.
Well, it's echoing the sentiments of Nash's buddies, HBK and Triple H. They're following the reality. They're trying to follow the storyline. The reality of the situation is now being turned into a storyline. I applaud them for that, quite frankly. But I think I also acknowledge when Kevin did that, okay, we know this guy's a player now. We didn't like him. We may never like him, but he got over. And as a responsible entrepreneur, independent contractor guy, I need to work with this cat because it's going to increase my pay. We're going to draw more money. I'll make more money on the payoffs, blah, blah, blah. So to me, it was a sign of acceptance to a large degree when Nash got involved as the beard, so to speak, of Triple H and Shawn Michaels to a lesser degree.
Eventually, we know that Punk is going to be cemented as the tippy top guy, and he's going to have an incredible run with the world title, 434 days. Along the way, he's going to brush up against a lot of the top guys, whether it's Daniel Bryan or it's Kane or it's Chris Jericho or it's Triple H, whoever it may be. But something that we haven't really talked about on any of my podcasts is when he has a feud with Ryback, and Ryback is on quite the tear. And a lot of people assume with his new streak that they're priming him for something. And Punk calls in a trio of guys to help him retain the title and hand Ryback the loss. And he's got a crooked referee along the way, but he's also got some help from this new outfit called the Shield. And I think in Punk's history, maybe that piece is overlooked because obviously the Shield are held in such high regard now, but they were introduced as in an effort to help CM Punk. And allegedly one of the original ideas for the Shield, and I believe this is according to the legend, according to the rumor and innuendo, who Punk wanted to be the Shield were Seth Rollins, who is a former Ring of Honor standout as Tyler Black, Dean Ambrose, who was a former CZW indie sensation, John Moxley, and his old pal, who he toured all the indies with and had not just 60, but 90-minute Broadways with, Chris Hero. WWE likes this idea, but deviates and decides not to go with Chris Hero, who we know as Cassius Ohno in NXT, and instead slots Roman Reigns. What a tangled web we weave, huh?
Yeah. Well, poor Chris Hero, who's a hell of a worker, a hell of a talent, really is, and a great guy. He basically got fat shamed as well. He may have been another one of those guys that had too big a soft ass. I'm not sure, but his work was amazing. And one of my favorite guys to call matches for is Chris Hero, solid citizen, but the body, the DNA was not good, much like in the eyes of some, much like Punk's. Yeah, that's a significant deal, man, because Punk basically gave the endorsement. So all those fans that were loving Punk and loving his act and the music, the presentation, the whole 9 yards, now they get to, he can give the rub, very important. CM Punk gave the rub to the Shield, and all those guys, Moxley and AEW now, huge get for Tony Khan and company. Golly, Roman Reigns, they're doing all they can to get Roman Reigns at the top of the card and keep him there. And of course, now you get Seth Rollins, who's the champion and Universal Champion, beats Brock Lesnar twice in the same year. And maybe his most significant accomplishment is that he just got engaged to Becky Lynch, which I found was interesting that they went so public with that on almost like a wrestling angle. And sometimes you can't tell fact from fiction in these scenarios anymore with the internet as it is. But congratulations to Becky and Seth on their engagement. But that's another story for another time, I guess. But yeah, it was the Shield. See, I forgot. If you don't go back and research it, folks, you forget some of these little nuances. And this is not little; it's a big nuance. So the Shield got brought into the game by CM Punk, and they have made the most of their opportunities, without a doubt. So hope those guys don't forget where they came from in that regard, because Punk was instrumental in giving them credibility.
We should mention that not just old anybody ends CM Punk's historic run. I think the 380-day John Cena run was the longest of that era, but we know Punk's going to go 434. And when it finally ends, the person it ends to is the fucking Rock. And if you're going to lose the belt to somebody,
yeah,
I mean, come on, losing it to the Rock, not the worst thing in the world. March of 2013, though, he sets his sights on something else. I think the rumor and innuendo is that he felt like he deserved the WrestleMania main event for a long time and may have taken it personally when The Miz got that shot. And then when The Rock got that shot and it was announced a year out, and it feels like he's sort of being boxed out. But in 2013, he gets a pretty cool consolation prize, I suppose. He's going to be in there with The Undertaker. And this is before The Undertaker streak was no moss. And it happened at a time when Paul Bearer had recently passed away, and they did some interesting stuff here that still stands up today, where Punk is running around with the urn. And this time, instead of it just being the Undertaker's mythical urn, it's got the ashes of Paul Bearer. And in sort of the go home episode of Monday Night Raw for WrestleMania, Punk dresses as one of the Druids, attacks the Undertaker, and then dumps Paul Bearer's ashes on the Undertaker, and then bathes in Paul Bearer's ashes himself. Some really over the top stuff, but some good stuff indeed.
A heel. He was a villain. He was doing things to make us in a negative light uncomfortable, and it all tied into the storyline. And Punk had no issues, even though I'm sure the guy liked the money he's making on his merchandise and his T-shirts are selling like it's crazy because he had that cult following. And but man, him being a heel with this Paul Bearer angle was spot on. He was committed to for people to dislike him in a strong enough way where the great goal of any heel, folks, any heel, if you really want to say you're a great villain, then you must check some boxes. In other words, are you good enough that the fans will invest their money to load those snotty-nosed kids up in a car and take them to the arena to watch you get your ass beat? Great heels have always had that one common denominator. They have the ability to sell tickets for people to come see them get their ass whipped and humbled, embarrassed. And Punk had no problem filling that role. And then he does all this dastardly shit to Taker that leads into WrestleMania 29, which is the big, the big event in Jersey at MetLife Stadium. So I remember that show because I was on the pregame panel with Scott Stanford, Kofi Kingston, the American Dream, and myself. That was my assignment for that WrestleMania, and that doing the pregame and some postgame stuff, whatever it was. So I didn't get a great chance to see all the matches because of our vantage point, but it was phenomenal. He was a great heel, and Taker had no issues working with him. And obviously, when we're talking again about these guys that are not liking Punk's this or that and the other, I didn't heard any issues about Rock working with him.
No.
Rock wanted to work with him because Punk was red hot, and if you're going to get a win, you want to beat somebody. And for Rock to beat Punk showed that the great one was beating somebody. It was a perfect booking in that respect, and so that's why I question the validity of these blanket statements that the talents didn't like Punk. They like working with him. They may not want to travel with him. They may have thought he was too straight edge. I don't know. But nobody in their right mind could ever say that, well, I don't want to work with Punk. He's not that good a worker. Then you're full of shit. You got an ego that's bigger than you need to have. So why would you want to work with the hottest guy in the territory, maybe in the world, would be beyond me. And Taker saw that. He's smart. He's objective. It was good for the title. It was good. They had a good match. And it was just to me, that was the validation of how great Punk was to have more than one match with arguably the greatest star over time the WWE has ever had and maybe ever will have in The Undertaker. And Mark Calloway, The Undertaker, was very happy to step in there and do their thing with Punk. They danced well together.
We should mention that the only thing left for Punk here to do now that the world title is no more and he's finished with his Undertaker business, is to break up with Paul Heyman, his longtime confidant. And of course, we know that Brock Lesnar is also a Paul Heyman guy. So that becomes the issue, and Paul Heyman turns his back on CM Punk. CM Punk becomes the babyface, and he's going to target some of Heyman's other clients, including the Intercontinental Champion Curtis Axel. That was like 100 years ago.
Yeah.
They would ultimately get a Hell in a Cell match where Heyman has to suffer a few minutes of punishment at the hands of CM Punk. And he's going to start a feud with the Wyatt family and form an alliance with Daniel Bryan, which is kind of fun. But it's not too terribly long before it's Royal Rumble time, and he's not feeling good. He's not in good physical condition. He's
beat down. He's beat down and wore out and burned out.
And he finds out that WrestleMania in 2014, once again, he's not going to be in the main event. Instead, it's going to feature Batista. And that's enough for him. So on the January 27th episode of Raw, he lets Vince McMahon and Triple H know that he's going home. Yeah. And I think Vince McMahon in February would tell listeners on the investors conference call that he was taking a sabbatical. Famously, he gets his release on the same day he's getting married. And around November, I guess Thanksgiving, sometime in there, he appears on Colt Cabana's Art of Wrestling podcast, and the internet melts down. He tells the entire story of why he left, what led to him leaving. He's very critical of the WWE's medical staff. He takes a couple of shots at Ryback. He is just not happy and happy to have wrestling in the rearview mirror. Decides to try his hand at MMA. And I think most people know he had a fight in the UFC with Mickey Gall, and he had a second match. He wasn't successful in either one of those, but a lot of kudos to a guy who really didn't have a mixed martial arts background and is coming from the world of sports entertainment and decides to forego millions of dollars and try his hand at something totally new. Yep. And put himself out there on the big stage. And I know a lot of Punk haters have been critical and said, oh, he should have had to work his way up and he should have had to fight on the smaller shows. But because of his name, UFC saw money in this guy, as well they should have, because he brought a lot of interest to those shows. And it's something he still has a passion for now. He's doing commentary.
He's good at it. He's a hell of a broadcaster, and he's good at it because he has the ability to communicate. And he has the one thing that all these color guys have got to have is a committed relationship with the genre, where you encourage yourself to obtain all the product knowledge that you can possibly muster. The one thing I will say, I've got this a lot. Did CM Punk not deserve to be in a WrestleMania main event? Well, I take exception to that because I think he was in WrestleMania main events. Anytime you wrestle The Undertaker at WrestleMania, Conrad, with that streak on the line, that's a main event level match. Now, if your only criteria that there could only be one main event at WrestleMania, and it's got to be by just osmosis the last match of the night, that's the only main event, and I don't agree with that philosophy. So to say that CM Punk never headlined a WrestleMania, I argue that point because I will tell you that I believe, and I was one of those fans, that one of the main reasons I was excited about that WrestleMania with Undertaker and Punk was that match. To me, it had more sizzle, more mystique, it was more compelling than anything else booked on the card. Now, if going on last is your only criteria, then so be it. That's your philosophy, not mine. I think he was in WrestleMania main events, and I think he was in a WrestleMania main event with the most respected guy on the roster in The Undertaker. And I can promise you that if The Undertaker had not wanted to work with Punk, then he would not have been forced to do so. So I some of those things I take a little exception to, but he's not working on WrestleMania main event. But you're right. If your only criteria is going on last, then you make your point, but I don't agree with it.
Well, what we can all agree on is that CM Punk is back in wrestling, at least for one day. And that's right. This Saturday. StarCastOnFight.com is where you can catch him with a live mic for the first time in a long time, 5 years. Man, time flies. You can also catch him, as we mentioned, doing commentary for Cage Fury Fighting Championships, the CFFC. You can see that on UFC Fight Pass. I think he just did his first show last year, and I think he did one a few weeks ago. So he's pretty active there. You can also probably catch him at a Chicago sports game. He's a Blackhawks fan, a Cubs fan, and he's a big comic book dude. So you never know when you might see him around there. You can also see him on the big screen. I think he's got The Girl on the Third Floor and Rabid, 2 movies coming out this year. So he stayed busy for a guy who's quote unquote retired, huh?
Absolutely. And the other thing too about post wrestling relationships, sometimes they're a little tepid, sometimes they're fragile, and they can become hostile. And he has had a successful marriage to his lovely little wife, and I just think that's somewhat of an accomplishment because the spotlight ended for, she wrote a great book, quite frankly. And, I think they've done really well. His acting's been good. He's almost like a Renaissance guy. And maybe that was one of his issues because so many guys in wrestling, they're one dimensional. They live for, they live for the moment. They live for the spotlight, and when the spotlight subsides, it can have an adverse effect on one's relationship and one's personality, especially if you were the primary guy or girl, and both he and his wife are big time stars. So I think he's had a good life. I think the fans are going to love what he's going to do at StarCast 3, no doubt about that. Just a Renaissance guy, man. And look, somebody says, "Well, is he going to get back in wrestling?" I don't think the guy will ever wrestle again. Now, I'd love to be wrong, but if he did wrestle again, the best I could see it being would be a one-off. Now, would have no issues him having a one-off in AEW. Obviously, tongue in cheek here, be great. Is it going to happen? Don't look for it to happen, but I'd love for it to. And knowing him as how he works, how his mind works, it's hard to say that he would never do it, but I just don't think it's very likely. So seeing him in this forum at StarCast on Saturday could be one of the last opportunities that folks get a chance to see him in this arena, in this mindset. And if you're a fan of his work, if you're a fan of the wrestling business, you can't afford to not check this thing out. And as Conrad said, if you can't be with us in Chicago, then you can certainly be with us from the comfort of your own home on the Fight app. And that one show alone to me is worth the entire price tag because of where he's coming from and the fact that Conrad has convinced him to share with his fans one last time, as it were. And I think it's something we're all going to enjoy seeing. And I can't wait to watch the show myself. I'm a big CM Punk mark. I respect his work. I've always liked Phil, but I don't know how it would have been if I had been in talent relations instead of Laurinaitis. Not knocking John in that regard, but we've managed differently. We communicated differently, and maybe things have been a little bit smoother for him there because it didn't seem like he had the backup that he needed. But this show at StarCast is going to be extraordinary, and folks can't encourage you to watch it enough. And again, you say, "Well, I can't get to Chicago, Jay." Okay, Conrad's got the answer for you. The Fight app. It's easy. You buy it, and you get so much stuff with it, and it's like you're there. So take advantage of it, folks. As a fan of StarCast and being a small part of it as a talent, there's nothing more I'm looking forward to at StarCast and listen to CM Punk tell his story and interact with the audience.
Let's talk a little bit about what the fans want to know from you, Jim. We asked you on social media at JR Grilling, hey, do you have some questions about CM Punk for Jim Ross? If you'd like to participate in the conversation any week here on the show, just follow us on Twitter at JR Grilling. Jim, we got some good questions here. I'm going to hit you with them rapid fire. Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Let's get started with a great one. This is from Chance. Do you think CM Punk reached his full potential in WWE?
No, I think he should have been. No, I don't. So answer your questions. The answer is no. I think that under a different mindset, under a different communication had been better. There was much more that he could do. When he left, he was young, right in the prime, the sweet spot of his career. So I don't think he realized his potential there whatsoever. And now he's 40. So, Father Time doesn't do any jobs. He just doesn't. He goes over every time. So I don't know, the ship may have sailed for CM Punk at 40 to have many more matches, but that's why I say if we have one long shot at best, it'll be a one-off. But I don't think he reached his full potential whatsoever in WWE.
Fight fans in the UK want to know, where would Punk have been in terms of top guys during the Attitude Era? I know the business was different, but would he have been the number 3 guy behind Rock and Austin, or would he have still been maybe number 5 behind Triple H and Mankind?
Well, I don't know exactly what the number would be, but he would have been a major player. He would have been a main event guy. Punk would have been a guy that would be working matches with Austin and Rock and Triple H and Shawn Michaels, all those guys, Mick Foley, all those guys. He would fit right into that mix very comfortably during the Attitude Era. He may have been better suited, he meaning Punk. Punk may have been better suited in WWE during the Attitude Era than he was by coming in 2005.
Travis wants to know, on a previous episode, JR, I've heard you say that it's always better to converse with Vince rather than confront Vince. My question is, CM Punk always had stories of him complaining to creative. Do you think this contributed to him not being a top guy sooner? I guess the question is, did Punk have the wrong approach, maybe for creative or for Vince specifically?
Might have. I think what Punk wanted was the same thing that every other talent on the roster should want, that many do want. Some will admit it, some will not. And that is to have a positive, open relationship with Vince. So you can communicate with him. I don't know that Punk would have adhered to my mantra of converse and don't confront. I don't know that. But the key to a top guy in WWE then, now, and forever, as the slogan goes, is get along and be able to communicate with Vince. And then if you have issues with the writers, and some of the talents didn't respect the writers because of their overt and obvious lack of product knowledge, and the writers trying to portray that they know about the intricacies of the business, and you should be using this hold, or you should be doing that finish, or whatever. Really? Are you serious? You need to be writing limericks or something. Because, we all know that our favorite T-shirt is going to be, your testicles won't fit into a thimble. Your testicles will fit into a thimble. Thimble nuts.
Thimble nuts. There you go. Thomas has a question here that we got a lot, and I feel like we should address it. Everybody wants to know, hey, is CM Punk going to run in at All Out? The answer is no. I'm not involved in the booking at all, but I know that I get this question all the time, and JR, you know the truth, but people are like, oh, we know you work for AEW. No, I don't, folks. And this booking, and Jim, you can confirm this at least, this was not a piggyback booking. This was a standalone booking. It's not like, right, hey, you're coming in for All Out, you might as well come over for StarCast. That's not the way this went down. So he's not going to be at All Out.
If CM Punk's at All Out in any shape, form, or fashion, he won't be hidden in the crowd. I don't think he'll be backstage. He might be. I don't have any idea. But my guess would be, I bet my best black hat that he will not be in a AEW ring or anybody else's ring anytime. I think he's done with that aspect of it. But again, wishful thinking and being hopeful and being honest. I can tell you, Conrad is not an AEW employee. Conrad does not work for AEW. Conrad's StarCast event is his deal. And it's Conrad that got CM Punk to come out of the house and come down and do this show this Saturday. That was Conrad's deal. But to tell you what's going to happen at AEW, God, I don't even know the order of the matches.
Right.
So we don't. It's a funny thing. You get to a certain part of your life. I don't need to know all this data. Conrad's got no use for it. What's going to happen on All Out on the pay-per-view? It's not his deal, and I can't control it. So why am I going to worry about it? Well, I'm just saying, from my instinctual stance would be, we will not see CM Punk Saturday night, but you can see him Saturday afternoon.
Johnny Luchador writes in, as far as a financial standpoint, Punk used licensed music his entire WWE run, be it Killswitch Engage or Living Color. How do royalties work on licensed music being used for a performer? Is there a sort of tug of war with talent when it comes to trying to use specific music?
Well, WWE's got a guy named Neil Lowry who handles all their music and has great relationships with several artists, writers, producers, record labels, et cetera, and getting a song played regularly in a positive manner on WWE is a great marketing boost for the act. If we talk about cult of personality, as we started to a while ago, that's that they weren't getting. You didn't hear that song a lot. You heard it. You used to hear it some. They resurrected that music and that band, and made them have some relevancy. So you pay as I understand it and recall, the WWE would pay a flat fee to license the music for the CM Punk character, and sometimes they have an end date where you can use it, for a year or 2 years. Most often it's you're just licensed. They get the artist gets a one-time fee. They get paid a nice check to use their music, and then their music gets amazing exposure on global television. So that's kind of how that works. It was and it also showed this: I've done probably a disservice to WWE in certain ways about how they handle CM Punk. I didn't think it was great. Be that as it may, it is what it is. But you got to say that they went to the wall on this. This music license thing was not cheap. That was a big time investment to get him the music that CM Punk wanted that would fit his persona. So that was a big commitment by WWE that they're not going to get credit for that by anybody that doesn't like them or anybody that thinks that they're CM Punk devotee and they're not going to. They really screwed him around. I don't think that they did him justice, and oftentimes. But on the other side of the coin, here's the thing: CM Punk became famous in WWE. CM Punk became a millionaire in WWE, and he had great name identity to get the UFC gig, which was a lifelong dream for him. He's got a name identity to get himself into movies, television shows, and the fact that he can do this MMA color analyst stuff was also, to me, originated because of the name identity in WWE. So WWE didn't do a total disservice to CM Punk whatsoever, but there were situations along the way that could have been much better, and it could have resulted in a longer lasting run that many of us wish would have happened.
Landon wants to know, with so many estranged talents that have made their way home to WWE, even though it took years for guys like Brett and the Ultimate Warrior and Bruno Sammartino, do you think Punk's legacy is that he will forever be the exception to that? Or could he eventually mend fences and be on good terms with WWE?
Anybody can mend fences if both parties choose to interact in that manner. I don't see it happening that he'll reconcile with WWE. I think that bridge has not only been burnt, been blown up. But to say the bridge can't be rebuilt at some point in time, if all the cards are in place. What if WWE does a pay-per-view in Chicago, let's say they do WrestleMania in Chicago? How perfect would it be for him to go in the Hall of Fame with that WrestleMania?
Oh yeah, it'd be huge.
And it's a great booking. It's market savvy and market sound, great promotion. So that could happen. I just don't see either party going out of their way to reconcile for that night for the WWE Hall of Fame. Because I don't know that Punk believes that being in the Hall of Fame is going to soothe or solve any of his past issues with the company. And unfortunately, that's the way it is. He's a Hall of Fame guy. Anybody if you have to have a debate, does CM Punk deserve to go in the WWE Hall of Fame based on who all's in it already? Are you kidding? Of course he deserves it. We mentioned, Conrad, you hit it on the head. 400-something days as a top guy in the territory.
Right.
When does that happen last? That's that Bruno era. That's the Bruno Backlund.
In typical petty WWE fashion, they had Brock beat it. So, it's whatever. Hey, I do want to ask you, this is a great question from, let me see if I can get the name here. Chuzler. He says, why did Triple H bury CM Punk at every turn? He was red hot after the pipe bomb, and then Triple H's buddy Nash costs him the title. He never gets even with him. And then Triple H comes out of semi-retirement, beats Punk and Nash, and then goes right back into semi-retirement. Who did this help? What's the point?
Great question. I don't know who it helped. And the point was personal issues overriding logical, common sense business. And that's the personality side of pro wrestling. Triple H does not have the exclusive on those type matters. It's just the fact that he's very, very visible. He has a lot of influence. And that's simply how it is. I don't know that if Triple H was in the position then that he is now, I think he would look at CM Punk entirely differently, quite frankly, because as a booker, creator, whatever, top administrator of a brand like he is, Triple H is with NXT, you don't cut your nose off to spite your face. You have to learn to work with people. And as Vince, I'm sure Vince has told Triple H this. He's told me plenty of times. And any of the guys that are listening, we have a lot of WWE people listen to our show, and a lot of former agents and so forth. In WWE, you have to learn to like the taste of shit. Because as an administrator, you're constantly in a position of eating shit to get the match in the ring and taking care of these talents. And in today's world, in a big picture scenario, I got to believe that Triple H would covet CM Punk because he's, here's the deal. How do you think that the NXT would do in the ratings if they had a debut of CM Punk back on NXT on Wednesday nights? Is that a get? Goddamn right it's a get. That's a big challenge to overcome. So I think the logic used back then is different. The maturity, everybody's matured more. And in the big picture sense, you can't get enough CM Punks on your roster, in my opinion.
We've got, a lot of people are talking about this, and Francis gets straight to the point. He says, why do you think, in your own opinion, they never put CM Punk in a WrestleMania main event? And I think he asked this because we've heard other people say that when Vince looks at a WrestleMania main event, he sort of imagines what it would look like on a poster. And for whatever reason, maybe he never saw CM Punk on the WrestleMania poster.
Maybe there's something to that. But like I said, my answer to that is, like I said earlier, anytime a talent wrestles the Undertaker at WrestleMania, and especially when the streak was in place, that's why I hated to see Lesnar beat Undertaker at WrestleMania back when he did. I don't know what that meant. I really don't, other than it's a good win for that night. But the everlasting effect of Undertaker's unbeaten streak was much more valued than him losing to Brock Lesnar, in my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. So I
like Danny has a question. He says, it seems like in 2013, WWE was hell bent on Rock Cena 2 at Mania, regardless of how hot Punk was. Do you think it was a mistake not to do a 3-way instead?
It's hard to say that Rock and Cena was not a good booking because I believe that it was, but putting CM Punk as a wild card, figuratively and literally, in that match probably would not be a bad idea in hindsight. But again, the political favor, the political climate, it's like the bullshit of listening to the news, where the left side of the aisle, the right side of the aisle. I say to hell with the aisle. I'm tired of the aisle. I don't want to talk about the aisle. So Punk was on the wrong side of the aisle. And for whatever reason, good, bad, or indifference, we talked about. But yeah, the triple threat match probably would have been it probably would have made more people happy, and it might have drawn more people to the match because you kind of know what you're going to get with Rock and Cena. But Punk is the wild card. And, you go with all these things, is Punk going to shock the world and end up beating two of the WWE's greatest stars ever in one match, much like Jericho did that one night when he beat Austin and Triple H.
Yeah, it was Rock and Austin. Yeah, you had it right. Vengeance. Yeah.
So, so it was a lot of ways to look at it, but he just, I don't know. I think it's just a sad, it shows you how politics can affect the business. And most guys, if they're not named CM Punk and they're making 7 figures a year plus, are going to do what they got to do to reconcile. They're going to do what they have to do to swallow that bitter pill of getting more, embraced by the upper management. That's not him. He wasn't going to be bluffed. He wasn't going to be threatened, or we're going to, you're going to lose this great gig you got here that you worked for. You wrestled for 15 years to get there. It's not an overnight sensation. He wrestled for little or nothing in some little or nothing buildings and arenas, a few people there. He did everything. He paid all his dues. That's what I never understood about guys that would have any animosity toward a guy, because he likely paid more dues than me and the guys that we had on the roster.
Let me ask a question here that is maybe one of the better ones that we'll cover, because I know you're going to have a hot take here. Chainsaw Chambers 97 writes, do you think CM Punk missed his window to come back to wrestling? Did his UFC defeats hurt his drawing power now? It feels like if he comes back now, it would be cool. But if it was a few years ago before the fights, his appearance would have been earth shattering because it wouldn't have been expected. And maybe some of the shine wouldn't have been lost as it may have been in those UFC losses.
I don't see the UFC losses being a anti-shine ingredient. It showed that he has balls and courage and the passion to fight and for real, and to try to in that stage of life to learn a whole new skill set and a whole new business that ain't easy to learn and is very, very dangerous and physical. To me, he got more respect out of training and fighting than he would have if he had not trained and fought, even though he lost 2 fights. It didn't seem to hurt Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar lost some big fights in UFC. He won some too. That's the difference. And he was also the heavyweight champion. Get that. But I think just losing in a UFC fight has little to do with the success or failure of a wrestling talent. It's a whole different ballgame, quite frankly. So, getting him back anytime, him being Punk, getting him back on TV in a WWE ring would be a hit. 5 years ago, 5 days from now, Saturday night, whenever it may be, get into a wrestling ring would be a huge hit. The world wants to see him fight again in a wrestling ring. And I think we're going to hear that, and we're going to see that, and feel that passion at StarCast on Saturday afternoon.
One last question made the news last week. It came out in the Observer. What we do know now is interesting is that CAA, which represents Punk and also represents WWE, has had an agent reach out to Fox head honchos about Punk as a co-host of the upcoming new FS1 talk show. From a WWE standpoint, my gut is they would hate this idea. He'd be working for Fox, not WWE, and we're told there have been no negotiations at all regarding that. And the impression is WWE wouldn't like it, but things change daily. It's only something Punk's agent brought up and not anything that it's clear Punk himself wanted, although he has seemingly been looking into commentary and is doing lower level MMA commentary right now. So the idea that his agent maybe reached out to the Fox folks about him doing commentary. What do you think? You think there's a future in CM Punk, the wrestling commentator?
Absolutely. Yeah. He's a communicator. He's good verbal skills, articulate, intelligent, and has, again, product knowledge. So absolutely. He's got a bright future in broadcasting. I also had an opportunity to join Fox on, when they get SmackDown on a weekly show, in the studio. But, I already made a commitment. I signed with Tony Khan and AEW, which eliminated that opportunity. But I had the top guy there, extended that opportunity. And I never talked about it a lot because it just never happened. But I think that Fox is going to have a bigger say in SmackDown's presentation and a bigger say in the sound of the show than any other partner WWE has ever had. And I'll go to the extreme that the guys that we hear now broadcasting SmackDown may not necessarily be the same people that are broadcasting SmackDown come October. So I expect a lot of changes afoot, but if I'm Fox, CM Punk will bring ratings, and he'll be compelling and interesting. I think he'd be great in the studio there. And I would love to have been in that studio cast with him on a weekly basis because I think the dialogue has been very sharp and interesting. But again, I signed with AEW and no regrets whatsoever. But I'd strongly encourage the Fox guys, and I'm going to see them soon in September. I'm going to meet with Fox and have some social time during the UCLA OU weekend in LA. But it has nothing to do with wrestling. It's just a personal situation. So, if I were Fox, I'd hire him in a heartbeat. If you can afford him and he's willing to do it because it's every week, trip to LA, I'd jump all over that deal because he will bring ratings to the TV. And some of that stuff he does may be more compelling than the SmackDown at times. So I just think there's going to be a lot of changes there in that presentation, and I think he would fit very well in it because he would not have to deal with the WWE directly whatsoever. He'd be dealing with Fox, and Fox would produce the show and format the show. And I believe that Fox, as I said, and the WWE guys, that ain't going to happen. JR don't know what he's talking about. Well, okay. All I know is they got $1 billion in the skin of the game. You think they're not going to have a say in what you present on a television show? Because the guys at Fox have great product knowledge. They're intelligent. They understand wrestling. They understand marketing, and they understand what they have with that brand and that genre. So, yeah, I think that there's going to be a lot of changes, and one of the ones I would certainly consider if I were them, and if asked, I would say that. They're hearing it right now because a lot of those guys listen to this podcast. My friends listen to this podcast, and hiring CM Punk for that studio show would be a hit, no doubt about it. I hope he gets a gig.
Well, we know he's got a gig this weekend. You don't want to miss it. CM Punk on stage for the first time in a long time. He's going to talk about where we've been and hopefully shed a little light on where we're headed. The only way to see it is to be there live. You can pick up your tickets at starcast.com, or you can watch on your Fight app or anywhere you have a smart device. Go ahead and pre-order right now at Starcast on Fight. And don't miss tonight. We've got to sit down with the one and only Cody Rhodes. He's going to sit down with Tony Schiavone and tell his story about how he went from undesirable to undeniable. You've also got the Live Being the Elite mailbag. Tomorrow, JR will be on stage with John Moxley. And of course, the main event Saturday, right before All Out, CM Punk on stage. Don't miss it. StarCastOnFight.com. And we'll be back next Thursday and every Thursday right here on Grillin' JR with the voice of wrestling, Jim Ross. We need to run another timeout now to let everybody know about the risks of driving drunk. Everybody knows those risks. You could get in a crash. People could get hurt or killed. Let's take a moment to look at some surprising statistics. Almost 29 people in the United States die every day in alcohol impaired vehicle crashes. That's one person every 50 minutes. Even though drunk driving fatalities have fallen by a third in the last 3 decades, drunk driving crashes still claim more than 10,000 lives each year. Drunk driving can have a big impact on your wallet too. You could get arrested and incur huge legal expenses. You could possibly even lose your job. So what can you do to prevent drunk driving? Well, plan a safe ride home before you start drinking. Designate a sober driver or call a taxi. If someone you know has been drinking, take their keys and arrange for them to get a sober ride home. We all know the consequences of driving drunk, but one thing's for sure, you're wrong if you think it's no big deal. Drive sober or get pulled over.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.